We're glad to have all of you to discuss our troubling current issues regarding military coup, good governance, declining economies, democracy, the future of politics in Africa. And we have audience from various countries, and I'll be introducing members of our panel, distinguished members of our panel, starting with a Colonel, retired Festus Aboagye, who is a security analyst and a consultant for the African Union, United Nations, Joint Planning for AUP support operations. He understands the issue of security. He had also served as a UNDP consultant on disarmament in South Sudan. And he also belongs to the Center on Democratic Transitions in Ghana. If you have followed the activities of the Save the Children International Military Advisory Group, he served as a member. If you have not followed that, he served as the head of the Peace Missions Program at the Institute of Security Studies. He has also worked with the Organization of African Unity between 2000 and 2002, serving in his capacity as a senior military expert covering the Ethiopian-Eritrean conflict and the peace process. He was recalled back for another year between 2003 and 2004, again working for the African Union as a consultant and as a panel member on policy framework for the African Standby Force. And later he went to Burundi to serve as a senior military advisor to the head of the African Mission. And before this service, he was a prominent member of the Ghanaian Army, attaining the rank of a colonel, a veteran of several peace operations. He served on the ECOMOG force in Liberia from 1997 to 1988. And he put all his experiences together into a book, The Ghana Army, a concise contemporary guide to his regimental centennial history between 1897 and 1999. And he also wrote yet another piece on ECOMOG, a sub-regional experience in conflict prevention, management, and peacekeeping. A soldier, a scholar, he has published so many papers on regional peace operations and regional collaboration with the UN. I don't think you can have an experience richer than this and a resume better than this. Welcome, sir. We're glad to have you. Can you say something, sir? Can you say good morning or good afternoon?
It's good afternoon in Ghana.
Very good, we can hear you.
Oh, Prof.
Next is another Ghanaian who had appeared on this as a panelist, interviewing Samantha Nkrumah, Dr. Mary Owusu. She's an historian who studies modern Africa, ancient Africa. She's written a book on Prempeh. She works on African intellectual history, political development, focusing on Ghana, and she does transnational histories on marginalized personalities and perspectives. A very talented scholar, policy analyst. She took a PhD from Dalhousie. And she didn't went to PhD for that PhD until after she's taught for 15 years. And she's been a teacher, professor at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. She taught at Baldwin Wallace University, Ohio, Dalhousie University, Mount St. Vincent University, and she's currently a teacher at Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada. You can see how talented Africans are. And she's won various fellowship, Cadre Fellowship in Birmingham, Fulbright Fellowship, Isaac Walton Killam Fellowship, Rabahalu Award, and she's expecting yet another book from Cambridge University Press. Welcome, Dr. Mary Owusu. Say hello to me, please.
Hello, and thank you very much.
Professor Vladimir Antwi-Danso is a next panelist, a highly experienced researcher, consultant to many international organizations in the area of international relations, specializing on international security, geopolitics, regional economic cooperation, regional integration. He's been to several international conferences, and he's also held significant appointments: Dean of Students, University of Ghana, Associate Director, Center for Regional Integration, Director Integration Program of the United Nations for Development and Economic Planning in Dakar, Visiting Professor, University of Kigali in Rwanda, Visiting Scholar, Johns Hopkins University and Kwantlen University in Canada, and he completed his degrees at Legon, went to Moscow, Leningrad, and he also attended the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Harvard. Thank you for joining us, Director and Dean Antwi-Danso. Please, welcome. Can you say good afternoon to me, sir? I cannot hear you. I still cannot hear you.
Kindly unmute yourself, sir.
Now, can you unmute yourself, sir? While waiting for him, let me introduce our next panelist, Professor Ogundayo. Professor Ogundayo is an associate professor of French and comparative literature at the Bradford campus of the University of Pittsburgh, where he also serves as the director of the Africana Studies program. A distinguished scholar, a poet, a writer, he holds a PhD in African literature, combining it with spirituality. I think he's one of the very few in that kind of combination. From the University of Buffalo, a French master's degree in comparative linguistics from Queen's University in Canada, a master's in French from the University of Lagos, and he's been on sabbatical in Caribbean, and he just completed a one-year Fulbright in Niger. He will be talking to us about his direct experience in Niger in the last 1 year. Members of the panel, we're very grateful you're all here, starting from Colonel Festus Aboagye. Please, can you spend 3 minutes to introduce any issue of your interest regarding this topic? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Just allow me a moment to share my screen. So thanks, Prof. Thanks to all our panelists and our viewers from across the world. As I indicated earlier, I'll try and focus on the civil-military dimensions of the recent spate of coups in West Africa. As a backdrop to that, and I believe some of our colleagues will be speaking to this, we've had about 2 waves of coups within the continent. The current spate, in my reckoning, is a 3rd wave. Now, between the 1st and 2nd and 3rd, there were episodes of decline in the spate of coups. But as we turned the century post-Cold War, we'll all recollect that we decided to establish some norms in order to trail a new path towards democratization. And three key ones would be the Lome Declaration on unconstitutional changes of government. Then the ECOWAS Supplementary Protocol, which within the sub-region has become a very topical issue, also of 2001, and particularly emphasizing that the only pathway towards political power shall be through elections, which must be free, fair, and transparent. And away from West Africa, I think the international cooperation on the Great Lakes region, which also promulgated a similar protocol in 2006. And this is where the departure point comes, that despite all of these norms, we still continue to have both civilian and military unconstitutionality. And indeed, it tends to appear that there is a sharp resurgence. And this has implications for the African governance architecture, as well as the African peace and security architecture, which derive from the various instruments that were established. Indeed, this discourse is as a result of this spate. Now, I'm one of the few, or among the school of thought, who believe that the discourse must start from the civilian, so-called democratically elected civilian leaders who employ undemocratic strategies, including re-engineering constitutions, to remove term limits, to remove age limits, basically to entrench themselves in power. And I'm showing on the screen the classical cases of Rwanda 2015, Burundi 2015, Congo Republic 2015, Uganda 2017, and one that curiously we don't talk much about, that is Zimbabwe in 2017. From my estimates, in West Africa, we've had 11 such civilian unconstitutional attempts since 2003 in 7 countries. Burkina Faso, 2 years, 2005, 2014, Togo 2005, 2015, Benin 2006, 10, and 19, Guinea 2020, Cote d'Ivoire 2020, Senegal not long ago this year, 2023, and the Gambia 2021. Indeed, Gambia also has an episode this year, I think. Now, such leaders have also employed, very disturbingly, systems of constitutional tyranny accompanied by violence, imprisonment, killings, and exiling of political party opposition especially, simply to meet their parochial interest. I'll be ending on this slide. I suppose my 3 minutes will be over very shortly. Is that on the other side of the equation, since 2000, Africa has also witnessed some 25 successful coups in 14 countries. Burkina Faso, 4 episodes. Central African Republic, 3 episodes. Chad, 1 episode. Now, let me remind our audiences and viewers that my timeline is from post-Cold War 2000, not the recent reckonings from 2020. Gabon, 2023, Guinea, 3 episodes, Guinea-Bissau, 1, Mali, Niger, 2 episodes, Egypt, 1 episode, Madagascar, 1, Mauritania, 2 episodes, Sudan, 2 episodes, Togo, and the intriguing one that I mentioned about Zimbabwe, whether it was a civilian or military coup, but it was a coup nonetheless. Yet 10 West African states have experienced about 17 coup attempts, besides significant crises in Benin, in Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, Togo, Gambia, Guinea, and Senegal. I could end here if my 3 minutes are up. Prof.
Thank you very much for that contest. When I was introducing all of you, I deliberately left out a king so that I could devote more time to him, His Imperial Royal Majesty, King and Professor Fuankem Achankeng, who is the Humphrey International Fellow and a conflict scientist. Is a king in the Bamenda Kingdom, but he served as a diplomat many years ago for Cameroon, and today is a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. And before joining the university, he taught at Marian University, the University of Wisconsin Parkside, the University of Wisconsin Fox Valley, and for over 15 years, he was a senior official in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cameroon. And during those years, he founded the Association for Non-Violence in Cameroon. And it's a strange irony that the area where he comes from now is now engulfed in violence. He's a leader of the Ambassadorial movement. They want to create their own country. And at the moment, his region has imploded. His most recent book, which I've had the privilege to read, Occupying a Panther's Truth, and he's done other books on nationalism, on boundaries, on peace and conflict. Welcome, King Achankeng. Can I use this opportunity to ask you to make your initial statement? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you for having me. Happy Sunday, everyone.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead and make your initial 3-minute statement.
Thank you for having me. Happy Sunday, everyone.
Make your 3 minutes opening remark. I don't think it's listening. You're not hearing me? Okay. Let's go to Antwi-Danso. I don't think the king can hear me.
Thank you for having me. Happy Sunday, everyone.
Thank you. Antwi, you still having problems? Professor Ogundayo, please make your opening statement.
Hear me?
We can hear you.
Good morning, good afternoon, happy Sunday, wherever you are. I would like to have a 5-point or 4-point presentation, but with the 3 minutes that I have, I want to take this opportunity, number one, to appeal to our presidents and leaders in ECOWAS for compassion for the people of Niger. I respect whatever decisions you take, even though I disagree, but for the sake of compassion, please let in food and medicine for the long-suffering people of Niger. We can sit on any international forum and have endless debates about democracy and the rest. It's important, but it's also important to put ourselves in the shoes of people living day to day in Niger Republic who had no hand in whatever is happening now and who really have never had a hand. So for the sake of compassion, please let in food, President Tinubu, President Gbagbo, let in food and medicine. And on another note, whatever we are doing to Niger in terms of sanctions, it has reverberation in the rest of Africa. Take the example of onions. It's a big producer of onion. The price of onions has gone up in Ghana and neighboring countries. That is no accident. So there are real life consequences to whatever decisions are taken in diplomatic corridors. Number two, I would like to talk about the anthropology of it all, namely, at the back of all what is going on and Francis' moves is the utter lack of disrespect, utter lack of respect for the humanity of Black people. France is basically replicating in Africa what it did in Haiti. We can get to that later. Third, France talks about liberté, égalité, and fraternité, and the universal rights of mankind. France promotes itself as a very diplomatic nation and culture, and yet France has total disregard for, some of the stipulations of Vienna Convention.
People are just
we'll get to that, and those of you who are better experts will also help me with that. And finally, the theme of West Africa, and resource control. And I'll illustrate that with, for example, every time there are elections in Nigeria, our politicians have to go to Chatham House. It's like we have to go outside to seek approval about how we intend to run our African countries. There's that. And we remember sometime last year, if memory serves me right, the president of the United States calls a meeting of African leaders in Washington. How about just getting up and going to the AU and meeting African leaders? So there's a bit of that. And then the whole issue of resource control, which in my view is at the bottom of all this. It's all about Africa's resources. I don't think the West, especially France, really care about, the economic and social conditions in which Africans live daily. And I'll tie that to what happened in Haiti. Haiti was the crown jewel of France's colonial empire, and it garnered for France at least 20% of its GDP when sugar was king. And we know what France did in Haiti. So we constantly need to awaken or remember or reiterate the historical connections. What's happening today is not an accident. What France is doing today is not an accident. It's just a lot easier to expose the hypocrisy or the French credo of liberté, égalité, and fraternité. Thank you. Oloye Falola. You have been muted, sir.
Dr. Wusu, please make your opening remarks.
Thank you. So I would like to focus. Sorry, I got a feedback from there. I would like to focus on political dividends, the democratic dividends or lack of it, which for me is at the center of this new wave of coup d'etats. So what we might want to ask ourselves is the important question: is there something new here? Is it something we have not seen before? And we would realize, if we were to make big chunks of our history, that starting with the 1950s through to the 60s, before independence, we had the anti-colonial struggle. The big bad person was colonial rule and colonialists. Let's get rid of them. Everything will be okay. We have the euphoria in the 1960s. Come the end of the 60s to the 70s, we in the 60s, after the euphoria of nationalism, we have political entrenchment by the fathers of independence. We can think of, from my own country, Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. We had all of them entrenching themselves, making people unhappy, and therefore, by their entrenchment, we then lead ourselves into coup d'etats. And at this time in the 60s through the 70s, we have series of coup d'etats as Colonel Aboagye looked at, the 25 that he mentioned. We have these series of coup d'etats. Then come the 1990s with the euphoria again. It starts with Matthew Kreku's government. Then we bring in democracy. Then there is the euphoria of democracy. We are getting democratic. And today in 2022, 2023, we are having coup d'etats. Just like we did in the 50s, 60s, we are identifying international machinations. We are talking about France, all the more because of the French-speaking countries involved in the latest democratic overthrows and coup d'etats. So we might want to ask ourselves.
But I've not spoken, I have a problem.
We might want to ask ourselves, what is the problem? And that's why I said, is there something new? From where I sit, I see that the issue is that we are seeing on one front political dividend in terms of democracy, and on another front, Africans are not feeling the economic dividends of this democracy. And therefore, there is widespread unhappiness among the ordinary people, which can be said for all of these major areas we have thought about. What is new here is that we have different actors, we have a different time frame. But I am advocating in my 3 minutes that perhaps revisiting the past is one of the ways in which we can move forward for this conversation. That once we say in history, coalitions begin to disintegrate when the common enemy is gone. So if it's really France, are we sure when France goes, the people will feel the economic dividends? I think we'll say no. If it's about the leaders, in Ghana, we can tell you, we have had several coups d'etats in Ghana. And in Ghana, we got rid of many leaders. In recent times, we vote them out. But when we literally cut off the head, do we feel the economic dividends? These are the questions I would like to leave us with. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Owusu. Can I call? We still have two people who have not made their opening remarks because of technical difficulties. King Fuankem, can you make your statement now, or you're still having technical challenges? You can talk now, I can hear you.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
This is the way I would like to begin. With a quote from the eminent Africanist scholar who happens to be moderating this panel. In a recent seminal paper, Professor Falola wrote, and I quote, "When the rest of the world aims for advancement and development, Africa is battling recurrent news of military coups and takeovers." He added, "There is something fundamentally wrong on the continent." I think I agree completely with this assertion that there is something fundamentally wrong on the continent. Unfortunately, the recent coups and military takeovers appear to have come to many by surprise. That's why I'm surprised. Why would the coups come as a surprise to anyone? Being recorded. Who is aware of the leadership question on the continent? Why would the coups come as a surprise when we're aware of the living conditions of people on the continent 6 decades after and counting after independence? Why would the coups come as a surprise when we know about the cooperation accords called pacts that were signed by leadership of French countries at independence. Why would the coups come as a surprise when political power is monopolized by the ethnic origin of leaders? And I could go on with these whys. René Dumont was very alert in his book, False Start in Africa. In 6 decades of independence, the false start remains with the continent. The result is a great deal of suffering and underdevelopment, decaying infrastructure, bad healthcare, problematic education, bad leadership, flawed elections, etc. Why would anyone be surprised about these coups? There absolutely ought to be no surprise when we consider the kind of leadership in Africa and what African people go through. What may be surprising were the reactions of the West and the initial reactions from ECOWAS calling for war, supposedly to restore the democratic process in Niger. No surprise from the West, just being true to themselves. Very surprising, though, was the reaction from ECOWAS. The West continues, as we all know, to prioritize their own needs over the aspirations of Africa. But ECOWAS called for restoration of democratic process without looking at their own practices in the mirror. What has been the most surprising is what these people have done or thought of doing when they ought to be thinking of their own practices, especially in the different countries in the West African region. I will stop by here with these questions and then hopefully pick up from where questions may come from.
Thank you, King Achankeng. Vladimir, are you ready for us, or we should proceed with you?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. I would like to take off from where Festus left off. He did very well in trying to bring to focus the kinds of waves of coups that we have had in Africa. The first wave, the second wave, and the third wave. And it is this third wave that people are talking about and making it look as if it is unethical, it is not to be expected. And that is where we all have it wrong. I think the last speaker was talking about how people are surprised. We shouldn't be surprised about anything. If you watch out the first wave and the second wave of coups that we had at post-independence coups, they were coups that I have labeled conspiratorial coups. Coups where one or two persons who had who are platoon mates or that kind of thing decide to conspire to take over the government for maybe some other politicians or themselves. These are conspiratorial coups. These coups, if you watch out, were actually made by lower rank officers, very much low, very, very low, lieutenants, sergeants, and that kind of thing. But what is happening today is of a different character. It is a coup, which I call systemic coup, where the system is declining, decaying, and stagnating, all because of what other speakers have spoken about, all because of the democracy dividend, which is not being seen, all because of the confusion between democracy, development, and neocolonialism. These three things are working together against the stability of African nations. And if you watch out to stop this hemorrhage, generals are themselves making the coup. So it's like the justification is clear. The state is stagnating. The state is declining. The state is imploding. So if you watch out, many of these coups of late are made by generals themselves. And such coups are a response to the stagnation, decay, and decline of the nations. As Festus mentioned, if we really don't want unconstitutional change of governments, then it must start with ourselves. What is ECOWAS and AU or even the UN worried about? When there were those unconstitutional changes by manipulating the constitutions in those countries that Festus mentioned, what did we say? One of the recent ones being Côte d'Ivoire. And when Côte d'Ivoire did that and Ouattara stayed in power, we all kept quiet. When there was a coup in another country, it was Ouattara who were sending to go and tell the coup makers to do what? To hand over power. Ridiculous. If we don't take care, there are several other countries which are candidates for coups where there is stagnation, decay, and decline. And we must watch out. And I think when the questions come, we'll be able to answer most of the things to satisfy why these coups cannot be stopped just by merely wishing them away or threatening to use force. They won't we can't wish them away. Thank you.
Thank you. Colonel, what do you think we should do to Mbasogo? He ruled for 43 years. Paul Biya has been ruling for over 40 years. Nguezo, 38 years. Our good friend who used to be a socialist labor union leader, Museveni, he has ruled for 36 years. King Swati, 36 years. What should we do to them? Or what should their people do to them?
Thank you, Chair. Because you have asked me for what I consider to be broad recommendations, which I had already formatted into my presentation, I would wish to suggest the following points on the screen. First of all, from what Professor Antwi-Danso said, and my other professor colleague from Nigeria, and my own compatriot, Ishimeri Owusu, indeed, what everybody has said is that democracy has not been consolidated within the continent. On the contrary, there has been a sense of complacency on the part of our political elite. And therefore, as a result, there has been democratic backsliding. If you disaggregate the elements of democracy, for instance, the cardinal one being the pathway to power, which is elections. African elections are totally flawed. And the Gabonese one recently is a classic example of where Ali Bongo is purportedly to have won just 33%, and yet the Constitutional Court announced that he had won is a 67 or whatever percentage. So we need to confront that democratic backsliding. That notion of our political leaders constitute themselves into a political club where they see no wrong, do no wrong, and want rather to check military unconstitutionality is not going to work, as my fellow colleagues have said. But having said that, we need now to find a way of establishing mechanisms that can effectively enhance civilian oversight. And this is a very loaded proposition, because in many of African countries, from Cairo to the Cape, the political class have virtually captured all the political spaces in our respective countries. The judiciary, for instance, the legislature. In fact, political parties sometimes have become coterminous with the state. And political party interest override the national interest. In my own country, you hear politicians saying that we did X, Y, Z because of the party, not because of the national interest. So that is going to be a hurdle. Because many of our politicians, actually, when it comes to governance, are novices. And yet, the moment you are voted into power, it's as if you are wiser than the rest of the compatriots that you have in your respective countries. So how are we going to establish or deepen this democratic oversight on the part of the civilians is a tall order. Then we need to ask of the military to also be professional. But look, the military institutions, indeed the security sector institutions, have all been politicized. If you look at the southern part of Africa, as a result of their history, the freedom fighting, the armed forces are virtually, the same as a political party. But in our part of the world, promotions and appointments and postings and recruitments into security services are all politicized. So how do you politicize security institutions that are supposed to be independent in quotes, and yet expect them to obey, if you like, civilian supremacy principles and so on and so forth? So this calls into question a great deal of dialogue. And this platform is one of the dialogues. But I believe as we go forward with the AU thinking about looking at reforming the African governance architecture, the ECOWAS also looking to revise or reactivate the processes that it had from 2001 to 2015 to try and reform, the protocol on unconstitutional changes of government. That dialogue needs to be started in earnest. And at the bottom of it, I think the frameworks for promoting respect for democratic norms, especially respect for human rights. I feel very, very bad as an African when I see blatant use of force by states in violation of democratic rights. A good example would be the 3-day demonstration that took place in Ghana from the 21st until yesterday. Why the state should use force to prevent it from happening. So if you close the democratic spaces and you gag, political opposition and other civil society groups, now what avenues do you have then for expressing political, civil views and so on and so forth? Then we veer towards the alternatives of either popular uprising, which would be very, very dangerous, and Tunisia is a good example, or we veer towards military mutinies, which are also very, very dangerous, or we veer towards military coups, which would be the better of 3 evils. But none of these, to my mind, will be what we should be looking for. So we need to improve civil military education, encourage community engagement. There are so many episodes that we can cite. The Stop SARS, End SARS episode, for instance, a similar one in Ghana or similar ones in Ghana, where the state feels at will to use force, not to manage, not to control, but actually in a punitive way to abuse or violate human rights. Then,
thank you. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
One second. Chief Achankeng, what is the proposal that Africans should recreate these colonial boundaries? That if people, as in your people, want to go, that people in Biafra, if they want to go, why can't we sit down and say, let them go?
I hope we could all do that. But even with the examples you just cited, there might be a little difference. In the case of Ambazonia, there is a problem which the Europeans failed to decolonize. The problem of Ambazonia was caused by the United Nations and Britain. UNGA Resolution 1514 says, grant independence to all colonial people and countries. The same independence that was granted to Ghana, to Nigeria, to Burkina Faso. When it came to the turn of British Cameroons, the UN and Britain said, accede to independence by joining. That was a major flaw in comparison to the Biafran case you just cited, or Duduwa. So I think if we lump all these cases together, we might be making an error. In conflict studies, we have a theory that each conflict is unique. I think the conflict of Ambazonia is about completing the decolonization of that territory, which has had a separate identity from World War I, which was a League of Nations trust territory, a League of Nations mandated territory. It existed within, between the two wars. When the UN came, they changed the mandate system to the trusteeship system. The trusteeship system was nurture the colonies to independence. British Cameroon was a separate entity. And so the problem arises in 1960, when Cameroon had her independence, British Cameroon was not a part. And so the people now are saying, the UN, Britain, come back and finish the job you did not complete. So in Ambazonia, it's a case of unfinished decolonization.
Thank you. Professor Owusu, suppose we return to the ideas of the founding fathers, like Nkrumah, Azikiwe, and others, talking about Pan-Africanism, the unity of Africa and Africans. Would this have been a model that would have prevented some of these coups and crises?
No, short answer, a big no. And this is because if we have a fascination with the politics of it all, without addressing the economic issues, we will always come to this same position. And that is why in my introductory remarks, I talked about putting the politics and the economics together. So coming to a person like Nkrumah, he declared happily that we will seek the political kingdom and other things will be added. And he recognized down the line that the economics was a very important issue. And that is when he began to talk about neocolonialism and think through how do we have an economic system that works for us. So for me, I come back to the same thing. Yes, Colonel Aboagye's recommendations. What was, for example, missing in Colonel Aboagye's recommendations is the economics of it all. If we focus on, yes, civilian oversight, but do we not have civilian oversight? We do. What we do not have is grassroots participation and ownership of the system. And these are, they have different colors in different areas, but these are the main issues. Is the grassroots really and truly participating? Do they understand the systems we are using? In Ghana, even parliamentarians do not understand the system. Majority of Ghanaian parliamentarians walk about declaring how they are going to bring development to their areas. They tout the building of markets, gutters, and things like that as something that is worth doing. Not one parliamentarian tells us in Ghana, I facilitated the passage of this law, which is why you are voted to go to parliament. Communities are left out. when it comes to making vital decisions concerning themselves. Grassroots participation is missing. We have to let it come into play. We need to question the choices we have made politically and realize that people just don't understand the systems we are using. Democracy is a system that thrives on your ability to read and write. How many people can read and write? On my own ways of thinking, in my own ways of thinking, I do honestly believe that we must not question democracy. It is good. We need it. In fact, democracy has been something that we have stayed with. And it is when there is political entrenchment that coup d'etats become, fashionable. So we understand that we don't like political entrenchment. We want to participate. But what kind of participation? Maybe it is high time for us in Ghana to be different solutions for different places. We are all not the same. And that's the problem too, thinking that we are the same. In Ghana, for example, chieftaincy could be not how it is, but ways of thinking to incorporate that system. These are things that John Mensah Saba in the 1860s through to the 1920s. What system is good for us? What system will work for us? These are not new questions. We are asking them today, but they have been asked over time. And people have come up with ideas and solutions. So anyway, let's Africanize our democratic structures. If we Africanize these democratic structures and we seek to go into the negotiation rooms with our economic well-being at heart as AU, ECOWAS, individual countries, we send people to go and negotiate who have no idea about the things they are talking about. And then we stay in our poverty and we think that the people will be happy. No, the people will not be happy. Let's solve the economic issues. Let's Africanize democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Antwi-Danso.
Yes.
So the economy in Ghana is sliding, Nigeria is sliding. People are very upset in Nigeria. Sierra Leone, our colleagues, their salary can hardly buy a bag of rice.
Yes, it's all
This is part
of
of what Professor Wuse is saying. What is the economic dimension to this crisis?
The economic dimension is because the political structures and pillars that will ensure the economic upliftment of these countries are themselves weak and unenterprising, as Professor Wuse mentioned. But let me go directly to your first question to her, whether uniting Africa can be the answer. And I would rather say yes. I would differ from her when she says no. You know, those of us in integration is such that it creates the necessary apertures for rapid economic development, because the collective, the synergy of countries' economies are brought together in the sense that it creates the condition for a larger market. It creates the condition for competition on the world market. It creates conditions for exploiting your own resources, etc., etc. And if you see great Africa, the resources that we have, if we were united in economic sense, whereas Nkrumah's political sense was good at that time. He was thinking, if you got independence, then you join the OAS, the Organization of African States, the Ghana, Guinea, Mali Union. And gradually all the countries would have been joined after each one had gotten independence. Then we tackled the economic whatever. Oblivious to the fact that the colonialists were just standing by. They hadn't gone. They wouldn't allow you to exploit your own resources. They had forgotten also about the very fact that the Cold War was very strong at that time. It was rather later, like Professor Wuse said, that he just saw neocolonialism as the end state of imperialism, and he wrote about it. So yes, the economic factor is not coming in only because the type of democracy we say we are administering. It's not democracy. There's no democracy in Africa. There's not a single country where there is democracy. What we see is state capture. What we see is the deep state syndrome, where the likeliness of those things that the white man will say yes and applaud, we try to execute them. Is there a constitution? We say yes, there's a constitution. Do you have regular elections? Yeah, we have regular elections. Do you have X, Y, Z? Those things that we see in a democracy. Human rights are recorded in a big book called the Constitution, and we say, oh, there are human rights, etc., etc. Division of whatever, the executive, the judiciary, and the whatnot. So when you have all these, then you are clapping, and they clap for you that you are democratic. But like Festus has pointed out, after all these, what happens? Human rights are not given. Participation, like Professor Usu is saying, is not there. And yet we say we have a democracy. And that is what creates the condition for the deep state syndrome or the state capture. And for as long as we have this, integration will be at the back burner. And if you watch out, every country has integration at the back burner. It's not part of the serious thinking. We only talk about integration, ECOWAS, when we have trouble, and we go there to chuckle glasses and drink our champagne and hooray. So for me, until proper democracy, as Professor Usu is saying, proper democracy, there are no two democracies that are the same in the world. So you can brew democracy in your own pot. If chieftaincy is to be the base of our democracy, so be it. If in our constitution, as chiefs are not removed or that kind of thing, we infuse them and we are ruling that way. It's our democracy. But when we want to copy, in Ghana, for example, we have a mixture of the Westminster type and the American presidential type, a blend which is not working. It is hiccuping very badly. It is because of the hiccuping nature of our democracy that the economic side is also sliding and sliding very badly. What we need to do is always wanting to go and beg and get some money to do, as Professor Usu has said, some projects. And then we forget what we were voted for to do. As Festus has already said, very importantly, everything is so monetized. The monetization is such that you and me, Professor, you can't be in parliament. I don't know of Nigeria, but I cannot under any circumstance see myself as a parliamentarian or a president of Ghana in the hundreds of years to come, because the structure that has been made is for only those who can get there through the monetized system. And therefore the corruption starts from there. You enter already in debt and you have to recoup it, and you need people to support you in that kind of order. So development does not come. And the people who complain, and as they complain, they will be on the streets, like Festus was describing. If they are not on the streets and they are quiet, they will support any coup that comes. It becomes popular. Let us see Niger, Mali. The people are on the streets supporting. The people are saying, France, go away. Whether they understand it or not, the coup is popular. So for me, yes, integration is very important if we can stop paying lip service to it. That's number one. Number two, the political system is archaic. The political system is such that it is the deep state system, it is the state capture system. Until we go away from here, what Aboagye is describing, the recommendation is given, will never happen. Will never happen. The democratic backsliding. We don't have the democracy that is backsliding. In the first place, we don't have it. It is the democratic deficit, which is the problem. We don't even have a democracy that is backsliding. Thank you.
Colonel, may I ask you to go, since you serve in the army, are there issues internal to the army that we can point to, separate from the politicians and democracy? For instance, in the Niger coup, some people argue that the general responded to those who have put him in that office for over 10 years because they wanted to remove him. If that is the case, that is not about democracy now. That is about their own internal conflict. And in the case of Nigeria, when Obasanjo came to power, he was trying to do measures to prevent coups. So they now retire them at the peak of their career. They move them around, they shift them around as much as they want, creating internal challenges. What are the internal challenges to the army that is creating this? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Prof. What I think is that, if I may use some country-specific context, there is this notion, indeed, in all the constitutions that you could come across, there is a provision that makes the armed forces the guarantors of the territorial integrity, territorial sovereignty, freedom, everything. Now, if you care to interpret this provision carefully, it's subject to two opinions. The one opinion is what I share with a Ghanaian General Albert Okran, Politics of the Sword, that where the civilian establishment, the political class, fails to meet the national interest, a national interest here needs to be understood not as being the interest of a political party or a president or prime minister, but the well-being of the citizens who are the sovereign of that state. So where the socioeconomic well-being of these individuals are not being met, their welfare is going through the tubes. There is unemployment, there is poverty, there is youth bulge. You have masses of Africans crossing the Sahara, and if they didn't die in the Sahara, they get drowned in the Mediterranean. And if they survive the Mediterranean, then they go into those dehumanizing conditions in Europe. I've never heard an African president pronounce himself or herself on this situation. Meanwhile, there is money in Africa. We have the resources, which is why all our presidents drive bulletproof Mercedes vehicles. And across Africa, including even South Sudan, you have fleets of V8, the very modern ones. So the system that Professor Antwi-Danso is talking about, and the other colleagues, is that we've created a system that serves only the small elite. Within the armed forces in the Francophone countries, I've observed that except Guinea, in fact, including Guinea, all the coups have been made by presidential guards, except Mali. So the regiment that is supposed to protect the president has now become the tool for removing the president from office. Sometimes because that president, like Alpha Conde, has violated all the rules of democracy in Guinea. Or in the case of the other Francophones, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, my observation has been that there are tensions, civil-military frictions between defining the national security strategy, including things like whom do we partner with to ensure our national security? Is it France or is it Russia, i.e. the Wagner? And the military class or the military professionals have disagreed with the civilian elite. So then you get rid of Roch Kabore, for instance, because he was opposed to Russia coming to Burkina. Or for that matter, Mali, gives a sack to even the UN, and that's France to leave.
So how do we resolve disagreements, which are part of normal conversation in families and communities? Because there will always be disagreements in managing any nation, about how you spend your resources, where you focus attention on. That's one level. The other level is historically, and you serve in the army. Those who created this police and the army, were they created to advance the project of the state? I do not know what happens in Ghana. In Nigeria, the wife of a politician can ask the police to go to the market to go and buy tomatoes and onion for the family.
That's right.
you can ask a corporal, the wife of a governor can say, hey, Sergeant, we don't have salt in the house, go and buy it. So how do we operate institutions like that without having consequences like this?
On the one hand, it's for the political class to know their roles and functions and mandates so that they don't abuse the mandate that they have. Not long ago, 2020, there were soldiers carrying the handbags of the electoral commissioner, for instance. And some of us, including Professor, have spoken about it. That is not the business of the military. In fact, in internal security elections, for instance, it's not the business of the military in a democracy to go and secure any elections. That is a work of the police services or police forces. But our own political classes have found it ingenious to use the military in the way that the colonialists use the military. So it's the military now that secures elections. And in the process, you get the military abusing human rights, including some disingenuous schemes that Western Togoland, like Ambazonia, only flares up when there are elections. And when the elections are finished, then Western Togoland goes to sleep. You see it? So it is the abuse of power by the political class, including what I said, the recruitment, the promotions, the appointments of the officer corps and other classes within the security services that is leading to this. Because if every day the military realizes that you cannot rule your country without them, very soon it gets into their head that they might as well come and take over. And that is one of the reasons why we have these coups. You see, there are quite a number of factors, including those mentioned by my colleagues on the panel. But that presidential guard system itself has now become counterproductive. It was inherited as a colonial structure or system from France, and now it is removing precedents. Then there's a case of corruption. Prof, trust me, when politicians corrupt, within the rubric of what we call personalized rule, the top hierarchy of the military system benefits. There are things that I cannot say on this platform, but the military class, the officer corps at the top, has become, hand and glove with the political class.
Yeah, but we can say some of them. In the case of Boko Haram, Dasuki Gate, security money disappear. I mean, there's citizens know all this. Professor Ogundayo. So France is saying French students from Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, no more visa for you. The people that have just been admitted, they stop their coming. Is this a form of retaliation? And are there other retaliations coming to prevent the success of this new regime?
Thank you for the question. I'd like to answer it from the broadest context as possible. Number one, we've heard so much talk on this panel and elsewhere about democracy. Very legitimate, very valid. But there are two things we have to keep in mind. And I'll circumscribe that by using the word mindset. Number one, most of what we call democracy in Africa is Maradona democracy. Sense that people use the rules of the game to win the game, and then that's it. So what kind of democracy are we talking about? And this is where I kind of blame our intellectuals, because most of the time we seem to be parroting what we have learned in our doctoral and graduate studies to the point where we are Trojan horses for Western epistemological and intellectual tradition. So here we are in Africa, we're talking about democracy as if it's something new that we have to embrace. That's one. What is the mindset of people who run for office? Do they have respect for the people whose vote they want? Number two, do they really know what it is to lead a country? Do they know the concepts attached to power, such as accountability, personal responsibility? That's one. Now, here is the other side of it. That's on the civilian side. On the military side, name any African country that has been independent since 1960. All our officer corps, all our army high command are trained in Europe, in Western military institutions. That's another form of mind control. So when they come in, they're coming in as elites. And they're coming in as people who expect to be quote unquote respected. So we have to rethink how we talk about political participation in Africa without necessarily repeating the tropes of democracy. Now, back to your question about retaliation. Of course, France is retaliating. It doesn't even mind flouting the Geneva or Vienna Convention, simply because, and I will illustrate with a concrete example. France is buying uranium from Niger for the past 50-something years for less than €1 a kilo, and is buying the same uranium from Canada at $200. And you can question my statistics, where, by the way, we know the uranium from Niger is the best, is the most high quality. I lived in Niger up until first week of July. Even before the coup, you could go for hours without, one day I counted 13 power cuts in a country that has uranium, in a country that shares a long border with Nigeria. So there's a mindset, and there's a very interesting Wall Street Journal article on how France puts people in power or supports people who will do her bidding. We are back to the question of mindset. The people we call our leaders, are they really our leaders, or are they self-serving individuals who really are there? They use the rules of the game to get power. Once they get into power, the people will be damned. I taught at the University of Abdulmumuni University, and I always like to use examples. I don't talk theory. I taught at the university, which is 5 minutes from the presidential residence. And yet, we didn't have internet connection. I have pictures. There's a room where there are all these computers buried in dust. So we're talking about resource control, resource management. And the sad thing is, when the people we vote for or we elect get in power, the first thing they do is they put the money they steal in foreign banks. So we have to look at the whole concept of power in Africa and democracy as an organic whole, instead of keeping repeating the same tropes of democracy. Well, this country was not, this guy was legally elected, so he deserves to be in power. For example, what is the moral authority that France has to refuse to follow the Vienna Convention that says any country can declare your ambassador persona non grata and can give you 48 hours to leave? And there's Macron all over the internet saying, we are not leaving. What happened to the sovereignty of Niger? That's part of the mindset that people who are in power, even the current government in Niger, would accept that, oh, it's okay. Whose international law? The game has been rigged from the beginning. We have to remember that. So if we want to talk democracy, let's look to our history, as my sister, Dr. Wusu, has suggested. Let's look to the question of state capture. Let's look to issues of patriotism. Let's look to issues of commitment to the population. This is a country of 25 million people. And while there, I was surprised by the number of Toyota Land Cruisers that I saw. And I was like, wow, not even in Nigeria So think about it. Let's revisit the role of NGOs, because they are also agents of the West in fronting and promoting a Western agenda. And some of us, in fact, there's a book titled The Treason of the Intellectuals. I think it's a must read for every African leader or professor or anybody who really wants to engage the subject of Africa. Why are we here today? Why, for example, do we just watch Professor Lumumba or Falola on YouTube as entertainment? And we don't ask ourselves, what is the mindset? What is the mindset? What do you do with $10 million that you steal? And by the way, I'm not going to disclose much. I was a rapporteur when Babangida was president. He proposed a meeting in Jos called Nigeria Foreign Policy Initiative 2000 and beyond. I served on the only committee with other people that was the only committee that was in camera, that met in camera. And some of the things I had, I have not, been encouraged since then. We're talking 1986. So where is the hope for our continent when we are comfortable promoting, repeating Western nostrums and tropes of what democratic practice should be? I mean,
Thank you.
Are we serious? We still have our lawyers wearing wigs, in hot Africa. I don't know. I'm just throwing everything.
Thank you. You've introduced a new dimension. Members of the audience, if you want to make comments, please raise your hand by Zoom while I invite Professor Antwi-Danso to respond to that challenge. Because Professor Ogundayo is saying you and I and the Colonel and Mary as intellectuals, we are also very responsible.
I think I agree with him to some extent. If you read Haiti and Haiti, Africa Betrayed, he says all these things, then he was lashing at intellectuals, even though the late Haiti was once an intellectual himself. But the details that he chants out there are very interesting. We are all caught up in that mindset. Our training, our attempt to be part of the system. I mean, you heard all those things in camera, but you couldn't do anything about it because you should be part of the system before you survive. I mean, Professor Ogundayo, so all of us, our background, our training, we are all eclipsed by what we learned, and the system molds you. Does not protect you aside, but molds you. It makes you part of the whole thing. And like we are saying, leadership is a big problem in Africa. The people who want to be leaders, what is their vision? Until Africa gets trait visionary leaders who know why they come in and what they want to do. But they must know their countries, they must know the history, the trajectory the country has had, and where we are on that trajectory, what he wants to do to veer us onto a good path. We don't have such leaders. And therefore, what they create, we need to be able to be within that milieu. Take, for example, if you were watching National Geographic, you would see that when some of the ponds dry, the different type of fishes in the pond begin to adjust to the mud to stay alive. And Professor Ogundayo, that's how we, the intellectuals, are doing. Some of us write seriously against government and against what is being done. We are labeled, we are chased, whatever it is, but we survive somehow. But others will have to play ball. Others will have to be part of the politicized, monetized kind of political system to survive. We all need to be part of it, whether we like it or not. Play our part in trying to change what we can change. I have been very vociferous in Ghana since the 80s, since the period of Jerry Rawlings, and I was chased out of the country about twice. So there's little that intellectuals can do, but many intellectuals are now voicing out things. They are writing, people are writing. Festus, you see over there, has been very vocal in Ghana, and I know he's not the pride of many, even within the military. But that's the case. You are eclipsed one way or the other, but we will survive.
Thank you, Professor Ademola da Silva. Please make your comments and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Thank
Proceed, sir.
Thank you very much. I want to commend the efforts of all the presenters. And but I also want to just draw our attention to something that I've not seen, maybe emphasized here. The colonial, the colonial factor, the fact that they are not on the standby, they are the puppeteers, and the African leaders are the puppets. All they are interested in are our resources. And each time they know that somebody is radical, is visionary, they have a way of taking him out. Now, I want to link that with this issue of coup. Yes, as somebody has already, put it properly. The fact is that we have really not had democracy in Africa. What we have is state capture. And in fact, it is a kind of coup, civilian coup, a more violent party, grabbing the state against others. And in order for them to perpetuate themselves in power, they lobby for support of these former colonial masters. And that is the reason why you have Mobutu Sese Seko and Kasavobo, conspiring against Patrice Lumumba, and then you also have quite a number of others, including even Ghana, Nkrumah. The coup that removed Nkrumah was not self-made. It was monitored because the West never wanted, that kind of brilliant person, as leaders. And that is why in the end, you find that they could spend 30, 40 years as long as they please the puppeteers while they act the puppet. And so I think there's also, there's need for us to take cognizance of this. And therefore, when we are working at the solution, we must factor in how do we disengage totally? How do we decolonize? How do we look inward?
Professor Da Silva, please, panelists, write down, not now, the role of external actors so that you will respond. Thank you, sir. Jonathan Bildo. Be short so that we can give opportunities to many people. Yes.
Thank you very much. I think the first question, the person who just spoke before me took the wind out of the sail. I am interested in knowing how we can visualize neocolonialism in the present circumstances, especially when Professor Antwi-Danso talks about systemic coups, the third wave of coup d'etats. How do we visualize neocolonialism in this kind of system?
Thank you, Jonathan. Bill, excuse me, Kanyana, if I do not pronounce your name very well, I sincerely apologize. Kanyana.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Falola and all the panelists. I come from Uganda, and everything that has been said about state capture is very evident. The sad thing about it is that we see it happening. In our case, for 36 years, we have been seeing it happening. And the president, of course, is aware what he's doing. He's a brilliant man. All the recommendations that the retired Colonel, Professor Festus Aboagye, I think, who is really very articulate, I wish he could be a president one day. All these recommendations, Museveni is very aware about each of them, and he has systematically destroyed them in the last 36 years. So in Uganda, we think that our hope is a democratic change of power, like in Ghana. What happens in Ghana? What happens in Kenya? What happens elsewhere? So it becomes so sad to see that in Ghana, where presidents are voted out of power, things don't seem to be working out, almost like the way is not working out in Uganda. And which leaves me with a question: what should we do about this? Where even a democratic change of government that every Ugandan hopes for and prays for does not bring the democratic goodies that we expect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I've seen people from Liberia, from Sierra Leone, from Uganda, from Ghana. Kolawole Omotunde, that's a Nigerian name. Kolawole Omotunde, yes, sir. Comment, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Can
Please,
you hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
I have some questions. The first one is it time and length of rule that is our problem? Singapore and world's hero, Lee Kuan Yew, was prime minister 1959 to 1990, 31 years. And he remained in cabinet another 21 years after, meaning his party has been in government for 51 years. My second question is it education and productive knowledge of the African citizen? Does the average African citizen, majority uneducated, have enough knowledge of what is good for him and who to vote for? The average African citizen would rather currently go to the church or mosque for miracles rather than go to the farm to seek wealth. Or is it our elites who think there is wealth in Africa when in fact, many of our countries are poor, truly poor, including Nigeria, because there are more mouths to feed and sustain than the total income of our countries? I would like to have comments and responses to this.
Thank you for those three important questions. Our panelists will answer you. MKO.
Kindly, okay. Good evening.
Good evening,
I
sir.
want to commend the efforts of all the panelists and those who contributed. My question was going to be, with regard to the book that were mentioned, the first one mentioned by, by Vladimir Antwi-Danso, Africa Betrayed. I want to get more information about that book, the author, and is that all about the title?
George Ayite, Africa Betrayed, George Ayite, A-Y-I-T-E, Ayite, is dead now. And the second book mentioned the treason of intellectuals, What's your other question, please?
That's all, sir. That's all. Thank you very much, sir.
Edmond Abaka is a professor, University of Miami. Yes. I've not seen you in 10 years. How are you?
Good afternoon, panelists. Yes, doing well. Thank you for a very engaging and very lively discussion. My issue is on political accountability. Some of our panelists have mentioned abusing the mandate, abusing powers. Of course, Prof. in Africa in Chaos referred to the African political elite as a vampire elite, siphoning resources, allocating to themselves all the powers that be. How do we demand political accountability? Why is it that when a new government takes office, it does not call to account or does not call, members of the previous administration to account for their stewardship to the people? Is it because they are
Professor
part of the
Abaka,
same elite?
if the new people are interested in stealing money, why should they bother the people who stole money before them?
Exactly.
So what should we do? If we are part of civil society. Can we push for whatever it is, a constitutional amendment? Can we push for a reorientation that demands that people account for their stewardship. I mean, another example, the concept of resignation is not part of our political discourse. In other parts of the world, people resign when they either do not perform, when they are found to be doing other things. But in our case, when people are egregiously mismanaging affairs, when people are found to be doing the wrong things, they are rotated out of that office and put in another office or put in a presidential office or whatever it is. So we don't demand accountability at any level. How can we do that? How can we begin to push for that kind of political performance?
Thank you, Professor. I will take two more and then I'll give them 3 minutes to answer and we'll go to another round. And when the panelists are answering, you don't have to, you just answer this one that is of interest to you. Let me take two more for now. Mohamed Hadi. Mohamed Hadi. Please, sir, we can't hear you.
Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
For the brilliant presentations. My points will go to Professor Owusu. I think we are not diagnosing the problem critically when we say we should Africanize democracy. I think the main issue is because there are certain values in our African society that we are bringing to democracy, which are causing the problems in our democracy. For us to succeed, our societies must lean towards individualism, patriotism, and citizenship. And if you look at our societies, we are more communal. Our values are more communal. We are nationalistic. Instead of thinking of the state, we think of our ethnic, cultural background rather than patriotism. And citizenship is not there. That's why our rulers are ruling us like subjects, which are coming from our African values. So rather than saying we should Africanize democracy, I think we should look at the conditions that will permit us to celebrate the universal values that come with democracy, like the respect for the rights of individuals, accountability, and good governance. For example, we talk about corruption. The very people who say, oh, it's okay, as far as it's coming from, it's okay, everyone takes it, so it's their time, rather than this. And the second point that she made, Professor Owusu, about that we need grassroots participation. Again, it is there. But like Dr. Ogundayo said, is the mindset. We still think that we shouldn't question our leadership. We shouldn't say issue about the respect for seniority. It's also there at the grassroots. You see that the political elites, they have political fanaticism at the grassroots. And we must look at all these issues well if we want to look for genuine participation that she is calling for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me just take one more. Usman Nureldin. Let me apologize for not pronouncing your name very well. You all are from very different countries. I sincerely apologize. Yes, please be very quick. We have so many people who want to talk. Please. Yes.
Thank you very much, Prof, and thank you for the panels for this very interesting talk. Yes, you pronounced my name correctly. I'm Osman Noruldin from Sudan. And my question will go to Dr. Festus, if I pronounce the name correctly. When he's talking about a road map recommendation, he talk about the confronting democratic backsliding and improving the civil military educations. I just want him to be more elaborate about these 2 points about what do we need to, some specific democratic norms that we focus on and try to consolidate those so that we can come out with our own democratic. Democracy is backsliding even in some very long-term democracies and well-established democracy are also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I want to use the opportunity of Usman, and I will focus my question just to the Colonel. So the Sudanese model, and I've been warning people, a country like Nigeria, that we're dealing with military coup. But in that Sudanese model, remember the origin of it. It was a militia, therefore empowered. Is it not possible for organizations like Boko Haram to actually take over government?
You asking me, Prof?
Yes, and if that happens, where does this leave us? Because we are talking about an organized army.
Yes.
Forgetting that militia organizations have gotten close to Aso Rock, they've gotten close to the capital in Mali. So please don't just respond specifically to 1 or 2 questions that members of the audience have asked you, so that we can respect the audience and go back to them. Dr. Wusu, they asked you 1 question. Professor Ogundayo, they asked you 1 question. The King wanted to react to the issue of scholars. My good friend, Vladimir, you want to react to the issue of democracy. Colonel, please, can you start?
Thank you, Prof. And thanks for all the questions. Let me see whether I can take maybe 2 of them, please, including the last one from Khartoum, supposing you are in Khartoum. Now, these are very difficult questions to start with. So let's assume that in the cases of Uganda and Sudan and elsewhere, Togo and so on, that the citizens are now at their wits' end. There is hardly anything they can do because the incumbent administrations have succeeded virtually in capturing all the institutions of state, including even the private sector. We would expect that the African Union, for that matter, or ECOWAS, or ECAS, or IGAD, or SADC, using mechanisms like the APR or some other mechanisms, will call these leaders to order. It is a paradox that sometimes the leaders who came to power condemning longevity, when they have acceded to power, themselves want to entrench, themselves in power. What should the people do? There are 3 alternatives that I have mentioned. One is a popular uprising. And the Tunisian one was very, very dangerous, or the Arab Spring for that matter. The other one is for the military to mutiny, which is also very bloody. And I think the slides that you showed before we started the session, the most dangerous or bloodiest coup in Africa, where you cited the Nigerian one, is another example. Or for the military to take over, because there is no alternative to civilian dictatorship or civilian autocracy. That is the end of the story. Those who don't want coups must ensure that they call civilians who exceed their mandates to order. It is very, very disturbing that in the case of West Africa, for instance, you have Benin and Togo and Cote d'Ivoire, including Senegal, sitting in a council deciding to go and punish Niamey because Niamey had violated the ECOWAS protocol on democracy and good governance, when they themselves, prior, had violated the same protocols. That double standard is not helping us. So if we don't want coups or mutinies or popular uprisings, then the points mentioned, accountability and so on, must be at the center of the discussion. Now, the longevity thing is quite interesting. The other dimension is that, is it acceptable that in a country like Gabon, you could have a dynasty ruling that country for 55, 56 years? Or in the case of Togo, you have the Yademes superintending over the country since 1967, thereabout. And ECOWAS is very silent. African Union is very silent. And yet when there is a coup, then we hear, these voices blazing that coups are not acceptable. But how can it be acceptable that a civilian leader can arrogate to himself or herself, extra constitutional powers to change constitutions at will? It's not acceptable. So I think we need a collective effort, on the part of the regional organization or sub-regional organizations, civil society groups, academia, which already, I think you've been labeled already, but all these voices are necessary. We should not depend on the West. I've been saying naively that when you hear the West commending an African leader or African state, it means that they are happy about what that leader is doing in serving their interest and not the interest of the citizens of that country. So these are some of the issues that I think we need to look at when it comes to this longevity issues. It cannot be possible, it should not be the norm, that any leader should think that of the millions of adults, they are the only ones who can rule those countries. And the rest of us must sit down and accept that kind of narrative. And that is why those leaders who want to use unconstitutional means to rig elections, manipulate elections, and retain themselves or come to power must also be condemned and resisted.
Thank you. Professor Owusu, one or two questions for you, please.
Yes, so the one that was directly addressed to me concerning the Africanization of the structures and the other grassroots participation that I spoke about. So I will go directly to what Kole, one of the contributors, had mentioned. I think Kole has read Lee Kuan Yew's From Third World to First. And it is one that I would like to bring about. In Lee Kuan Yew, for example, gives us a very interesting take. One, he was from a third world country, if we are broadly using the term third world for our countries too. He stayed for a very long time, but he left on his own accord. He did not go through a military coup d'etat. And so I like the questions. Is longevity an issue? Or is it knowledge? Or is it about the elite? I think that, to take a leaf from Lee Kuan Yew's book, in the Lee Kuan Yew case, he was very, very interested in the economic development of his country. In fact, he spent countless times before he took over government thinking about, how do I and my cohort of leaders move Singapore from its current economic state? Singapore, like many of our African countries, has a mixture of people. There are Chinese, there are Malaysians, there are different kinds of people. And do they all like each other? Not really. In fact, in the very recent elections that occurred in Singapore, they had Tharman, I have to look at the name, Shanmugaratnam, who is the current president. He won over 70% of the elections. Now, Singapore's, the president is almost like, he doesn't have the clout. He vetoes one or two things that the prime minister brings up, but he doesn't have the clout. But that man went for that position. He won 70% across board. He was liked, but he is not from the ruling Chinese stock that most leaders are from. and he has been asked to go for the major position. He has refused to go for it. So Singapore presents us a very interesting dynamic here. One of the things I like, if Lee Kuan Yew was speaking the truth in his autobiography, is that he thought of the economic question and he proceeded to answer it with education. He did send his people out. So much as we are talking about people going out to learn from Western people and then betraying us as intellectuals, I beg to differ, but I'll talk about that later. But he did send people out. They came back and they worked for the good of Singapore. That is why I insist that it is not enough to focus on politics. The economics, when people begin to feel their pockets, when they begin to feel their lives changing, then they will support the system. In our cases in Africa, in Ghana specifically, I have a major problem with the kinds of people who come into government, whose lack of understanding of how the international geopolitics, international machinations work affects all of us. And if the people in the civil service, because we shouldn't forget that civil servants run all countries. They are there all the time. If our civil service is working, politicians can be checked. If not just, when I say civil service, I also want to mean all the others, police, military, everybody. Those of us who are government appointees, government paid, the system that is paid by government. If it works, the nation can work. That is what Singapore achieved, a working system. So that no matter who is at the top, the system works. So people are happy. So back to the Africanization, the reason we need to think about it is that people do not understand the systems. In Ghana and many countries, democracy is not new. Democracy is what brought Nkrumah into power. Democratic socialism is what he ended up introducing. There was democracy there. A few coups d'etats here and there. Ghana is now has practiced democracy over 30 years since the 1990s. So democracy itself is a governance system that we are very, very familiar with, back into even our own African political systems. But do we understand the way it is supposed to work?
Thank you, Professor Owusu. Please, thank you. Professor Ogundayo, just one question. What about prayers? Can't we begin to pray as Muslims and Christians to keep praying as we're doing? Just answer that one so that we can move on.
Yeah, we can pray until our eyeballs fall out.
Okay, then what happens?
We have to change our mindset.
Okay.
And that has to do with education. You are a historian. You've done so much to make history, African history, relevant to everything in Africa, and yet go around the curricula of different African institutions of secondary level all the way to university. We just laugh at history. And yet we are a people who live history because we're very steeped in the past. But we don't seem to take the past seriously enough to say, well, how did we function? What is our ontology? What has been our trajectory? And what lessons can we take from that? What can we learn from being colonized? What can we learn from the violence of our military rulers? And how do we leverage all this knowledge to do better for ourselves, for our society? Even our leaders have bought into the cool aid. August 3, Bazoum writes an editorial in a Washington Post, and there's a line there that shocked me. 40% of Niger's GDP came from foreign aid. This is a country where people are very devoted to their religion. They are very neighborly. They understand each other. Religion is not just going to church or the mosque and saying Allahu Akbar or praising Jesus. It's how you live your life day to day. But
thank you, Professor Ogundayo. King Achankeng, can we bring kings back to power?
Maybe, if the African tradition is what we want. But I think this panel accepts that democracy is the way to go with the rest of the world, except we need to practice it the way democracies are practiced. With elite and the academy particularly with the question of is education the problem? We would understand that in all these countries, Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, wherever, elites participate in the elections. It was striking that when we talk of corruption in elections and in democracies, members of the academy are at the forefront. One of the last elections in West Africa happened in Nigeria, and many of the people who worked for that election were professors and vice chancellors. And so is it because one of the panelists had mentioned that we are all poor and we need money? If that is the situation, we need to rethink governance. By governance, I mean distributing wealth. Unfortunately, Professor Da Silva had mentioned colonialism. Part of the problem is that, and I'll come back to this, the colonial state, the contradictions of the colonial state were brought to the new states. 60 years after independence, we're still there. We haven't changed. And so how do we compensate people who work good enough so they don't go out looking for bribes? I live in the United States, where the police, you can't offer a bribe to the police. Back in Africa, where I came from, bribery is just a normal thing. Why? Because the police, and professors said it, most salaries cannot buy a meal for people. So I think part of the problem would, or the solution would be to envisage or envision the compensations that people get right to the rank of the elite, and particularly people in the academy, because they are the ones philosophizing, they are the ones working here and there, they are the ones who said this was wrong or that was not correct.
Thank you, Chief Achankeng.
Can't find
Danso, Achankeng. Is there hope? So, is there any hope now? Is there hope? Is there any... You can hear me. Yes, sir.
Is it to me?
Yes.
Oh, well, there is always hope. I just like to state, try and relate to a few things that have been said. I think the question to my sister, Professor Owusu, was not properly focused. The person thought Professor Owusu was advocating an African type of governance. No, I think what she was saying, and which I subscribe to, is building democracies in Africa, built or brewed in the socio-historical and cultural relativities of Africa. If there is anything within our cultural concepts of governance that can be borrowed into our democratic system, that's what we're talking about. I think, my sister, that's what we were saying. And because no two democracies, as I've said, are the same. Indian democracy is brewed in the Indian historical reality. British democracy is the same. They don't even have a universal suffrage for their prime ministers. Your prime minister, you become a prime minister only when you lead your party and you win your elections in your constituency. American democracy is even worse, where electoral systems are concerned. The collegiate system can give somebody like Trump a win, even though he lost the popular vote. So this is what my sister Prof. Usu is talking about. There was a question about whether the current coups has anything to do with neocolonialism. Yes and no. No, in the sense that unlike the earlier coups I termed the conspiratorial coups, those conspiratorial coups were supported by the neocolonialist element, that is the Cold War patrons. Those coups were conspiratorial because the patrons paid some people to do them. This time we have systemic coups made by the generals because the system is imploding. Neocolonialism is to blame one way or the other because of the economic situation in which these countries find themselves before the coups come. It is because of the neocolonialist tendencies, like my brother who stayed in Niger was saying. Here was in Niger swimming in the basic element for electricity, and yet they don't have it. And France is buying them at the point where they want to, and France can bluff. So you see that neocolonialism is involved, yes, but no, they are not patronizing the coups. So that's what I would say about that. The hope that we have is the fact that these things are unraveling, and the more they unravel, the more we become wise. Some of the things we're doing on this program shows that we are putting enlightenment to these things, and gradually we will have leaders will be thinking. I remember the guy from Uganda who asked the question. I remember I was in Uganda some few years back. We met with Museveni, and he was sharing a joke saying the international community is asking him when he was leaving. And he said he had told them that he had nowhere to go. His people, if his people liked him. That question was very, very interesting to me. So I said, how do you know whether the people like you? So as long as they voted for him. And look, that's how we have diminished democracy, in the sense that if we manipulate even the polls and we continue, then longevity has no problem. These are the issues that are coming out, and we are now being wiser. So, Professor, my brother Festus has indicated that popular uprising, popular revolt is one way to go. Yes, I support that idea, but not when it is supported by neocolonialist maneuvers like the Arab Spring. Not when it is. All right.
Thank you. Professor Wusu, answer. Professor Wusu, answer. Are you still there? It's gone. Chiodo Wank. Chiodo.
Sorry, Prof. He's
Professor,
there.
Hold on. Professor Wusu, answer, please. Go ahead. Unmute yourself, sir. Unmute yourself.
Please unmute yourself.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity to join. I wanted to make a comment. Thank you very much, Festus, and Dr. Usu's economic argument and participation grassroots is very important. But the thing I have always wondered about is why do we, I'm using the case of Ghana. Edmond and I finished in the 5th edition of the Historical Dictionary, and I've done the first 3 or 4 editions. And I've looked at everything that we have agreed to, whether it's ECOWAS agreement, whether it's United Nations agreements and everything we sign, and we never implement them. The same way as we have the constitutions and we don't follow them in detail in participations. We have the Electoral Commission, the Media Commission, and other commissions categorically decided that once those individuals have been appointed into position by the president and confirmed by the parliament, they are left alone to do their work. And yet, we see over and over and over again politicians trying to influence these particular outcomes. Michael Amoa just did a paper on the French constitutions. but I think that it also, Uganda case, civilian administrators even trying to change and say that, well, they voted for me to go for a third term, when we know that clearly it's 2 terms. You step out, and then if you want, you come back. If you do that consistently, and you bribe people to vote for you, and you manipulate the system, how do we get a governance system? Because once you are in place like that, you don't care whether you fix the roads and do it properly. You don't care if the hospitals have medicine. You don't care as long as you can manipulate the electoral system. This is part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Chidon Wakwo, excuse me forgive me if I do not pronounce your name very well.
That's all right.
Chidon, go ahead, please.
So thank you all. This has been a really enlightening discussion. So there's been a couple ideas floated here that I just want to kind of string together to make the point that I want to make, which I really have not heard made here. And I think it continues to be part of the issues that we keep struggling with. Somebody talked about the anthropology of coups in Africa, string that together with the idea of diagnosing the issue properly. And part of the issue is the contradictions, as someone rightly pointed out, of the colonial state that were brought into the new state. And this, although it was not detailed, I believe it includes the institutionalization of unequal relations, right? Especially that between men and women, that's gender, while the colonial enterprise continues to tout the ideas of egalitarianism for the French state, or the ideas of fairness and equity for the English state. Somebody also talks about coups as an instance of state capture. And I want to make the argument or make the suggestion that state capture is a gendered, violent, and hierarchical project that feminizes the civilian governing project, right? Hence the takeover, the violent takeover of power. So intellectuals, critics, comrades, continue to decry these dysfunctional dynamics while remaining oblivious or refusing to, address its gendered essentialist origins, or in precise terms, the fundamentalist rupture that is gender inequality across the continent. I want to submit that gender inequality is at the root of the violent military takeover project. And unless we really begin to address these contradictions, I think there's a tendency that we begin to continue to run around this issue of dysfunctional structures.
Dr. Nwakwo, I've never heard this argument before.
Well, yeah, Prof, I cannot, yeah, and I wonder why we don't hear this.
Mary, is it a valid argument?
Very much so. In fact,
can you please explain to this audience, because
yes,
it's a very fascinating dimension. How do we break it down?
Yes,
to an intelligible person like myself.
Let me just use, when I say Africanization, for example, if we were to go down to the Ghanaian Akan, and I'm limiting it to the Akan, the Ghanaian Akan conceptions of governance, which is also shared by the sectors within Nigeria, I think the Igbo at least, that where you have leadership, there was always male leaders, female leaders. And that brought the balance. Because in terms of the cosmology and the understanding of our ancestors, it is not possible that only one side, when they are, and now, of course, we have a varied understanding of gender beyond by the binary of male and female. But because many of us still use it, I'm sticking to that. So there was male leaders, there was female leaders, and that helped with understandings of various issues In many of our countries, the systems we inherited from the colonialists, because of the patriarchal dominance of their ways of being, it became only men. And a lot of us, whether we like it or not, whether it's the American system, the British system, they are all also steeped in the Judeo-Christian understandings of the world. So that if you pick up the Bible and what was happening within that space and other religions that claim the Judeo-Christian origins, then you will understand that there is a male hierarchy over there that has become part of their governance system.
Thank you, Professor. So if they have gained something and we have to pursue this further, somebody has to write a media piece to explain this dimension to the public. General Ishola Williams. General Williams still alive? Is that him?
I see.
Your turn, please. The corner is asking whether the general is still alive.
I saw him about 30 years ago.
Now you can hear me? We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead,
Yes,
sir.
we can hear you.
Somebody just said he didn't see you. He saw you last time 30 years ago. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
We'll bring you back. We'll bring you back when your system is stable. Lara Luko will bring the general back when the system is running away from the colonel. Lara Luko.
One basic fundamental that you need to understand that in most of our countries, tries to create.
We'll bring you back when your system is stable. Lara Luko.
Thank you, Prof. And good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the wonderful panel. It's been an interesting conversation. I just have a question about military, the role of the military in securing democracy and helping with governance in a country. And I'm not sure if this has been discussed already. So I read the Guinea leader's address to the UN General Assembly, and it was talking about how it was important for the military to have been involved because of broken promises from civilian governments. And I'm just wondering, and also for me, being Nigerian and understanding the role the military played in, the NSAS protest where civilians were trying to, we're protesting peacefully. I understand how powerful the military is in any government. So it's either they're being used by the civilian government or they themselves are taking over power. So I'd like for someone to maybe speak to this. What is the role of the military in democracy, in governance, and helping with securing development and just helping the citizens of a country prosper? Thank you.
Thank you. Is the general still there? Because if your system is functioning now, you can come back. Has he left? Please, is your system back now?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I want to start by saying that, okay, and therefore that multi-ethnicity is expressed in politics and also in the security agencies. And each ethnic group has an interest.
Sir, your system is not functioning.
And in the adopted political.
We'll bring you back. We'll bring you back. Adebowale Shobowale. Adewale Shobowale. Yes.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to chip in maybe 1 or 2 points. In the first instance, it's like we are kind of westernized, and maybe we tend to forget that before the Europeans came, we've been practicing our own form of democracy. Like the Oyo Empire, the one practiced in Ghana. Okay, can't we maybe maybe modernize it? Bring the Ubuntu from South Africa, bring the Aro from Yoruba land and all those things, and incorporate them into our own African system.
Thank you. People have made that suggestion. Africanization. Two members have raised that. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bumi Fatoyi Matori from Duke. How are you? Your comments, please.
Hello, everyone. I have 2 remarks, and one of them will be a question, and any of you on the panel can please answer the first remark is the Western region, the old Western region led by Tivawolowo, seem to have worked in terms of Professor Nwosu had been talking about the economics of democracy, why people would buy into it. And I grew up in that system, before all the military coups and wars, and democratization of education, industrialization, rural development, healthcare, and so on happened. Should we consider that model? What made it work? Because I think it's a very important. I know we are talking of different countries and we're trying to be specific. That's a specific experiment that worked for the Western region, old Western region in Nigeria. That's one. 2, 2 speakers ago talked about the inequality, institutionalization of inequality, of equal relationships. And she mentioned gender, the relations between men and women as the root of coups and so on and so forth. I agree with her, but I want to add that the very important point she made, that prior to European colonization, Africans were going about colonizing each other, fighting each other, selling each other. I attended a Zoom conference last week on Oshu caste system in Igbo land, and I was shocked. Going on, some people, it's a very complex situation. And it's not just among the Igbos. I'm sure all of our groups here, whatever ethnic group you come from in Africa, there's some serious internal dynamics going on in terms of who is inferior, who is superior, who, child of enslaved people. So should we start looking at those relationships prior to the entry of the colonizer, as we call them, and how they are still on our politics, an idea of democracy, and the Nigerians discuss this ad nauseum. Oh, the Fulani oligarchy, the Fulani feudal system is controlling Nigeria. They say things like that. So should we start thinking of ourselves as more than sorts of European colonization and see group dynamics that preceded that experience? Thank you.
Thank you, Ma. Call Akimbode.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, panelists, for the presentations. I have a few questions. I think it cuts across the speakers. The first question is, while there has been a wave of coups in some African countries from Guinea to Gabon, I'm just wondering, what's your thoughts about countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Ivory Coast? I mean, these countries, of course, the possibility of coup, many will say is unlikely, but unlikely doesn't necessarily mean that it is absolutely unlikely. So what are your thoughts on coups in these countries that I mentioned, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and Ivory Coast? Of course, they seem politically stable, but within it, we know that there are issues that really that they are battling with as countries. And if the possibility of coup is in these countries, what are those things? And if it is not possible to have coups in these countries, why is it not possible? The second question that I want to ask quickly is about African intellectuals and progressives that have been part of the democratization process. We know that before Africans became adopted democracy in the 90s, these progressives and intellectuals were very active. They were at the forefront of the process. But it looks like some of them have either been part of government or involved one way or the other. So it looks like most of them have lost their vibrancy, their energy. What accounts for the lukewarmness of the intellectuals, and how can they overcome it? Finally, I get the argument about neocolonialism. However, I am wondering, what can we do as Africans without the West? Can Africa, as a people, as politicians, as intellectuals, can they actually do their own politics, their own economy? I mean, I think it was Samira Amin that talks about delinking. But can Africa actually deal with its own issues by itself? Thank you very much.
Are you talking about the inevitability of Western domination, or you are talking about the possibility of African assertiveness to manage its affairs? Because
the inevitability of the inevitability of Western presence in African
No, they can
affairs.
be present, but it doesn't mean they can exploit us and dominate us.
Yes,
Okay,
they can be present, but it looks like from the political angle, our political leaders often find a reason to justify, to rationalize their relationship with the West.
That is their own problem.
But even we academics,
as to the possibility of, because we are an agency. You are talking to me, you are an agency.
Yes.
Human beings have an agency. In some ways, that is the choice they have taken. Can we disconnect ourselves from global forces? No one is recommending that. We have to trade. We have to accept technology. We have to get what we don't want. But can you allow yourself to be dominated? Those are the structures you put in place. So let me let the panelists, I'll give them 3 minutes each to respond to any aspect that they want to, starting with Antwi-Danso. Any issue, don't respond to everything, just any one point that you want to respond to.
Thank you very much. I'm more interested in the last two contributors. The question of neocolonialism, I think, is being misunderstood here. Like you properly put it, Prof, we are not asking for disconnect, that we can disconnect ourselves completely from the West. No, we're talking about domination when they micromanage us by continued exploitation, and that we cannot extricate ourselves from their stranglehold. That is what neocolonialism is about. So the last questioner may be confused that with assertiveness, that we can do our things on our own and we relate to them the way international law, international trade, etc. Can be. Now, the role of the military, somebody asked that question. I want to tackle that quickly, and I leave the scene for Festus and others. The role of the military is always enshrined in every constitution. But then the main thing is what we normally call in the literature, civil-military relationship. Civil-military relationship. And there are a series of ranges of them. It can be one in which the military is completely divorced from governance, and theirs is the barracks, and then whatever government does, they have to protect government. And then we have the cooptative type. The cooptative type like Turkey, like Russia, like Egypt, is where they have a role always in the governance system. In fact, Egypt cannot do without the military because they are co-opted one way or the other. They are part of it. That is why Morsi did not survive, because he thought he wanted to divorce governance from the military. So depending on what role you have assigned the military in their relationship, they will play that role. In the cooptative type, they are always part of governance. In the proper objective kind of relationship, they are outside of government. But their role as to what to do in governance is usually to protect the system. And that is why the latest coups we are seeing is a kind of protective kind of coups. The state is imploding and they want to come in. I'd like to stop here.
Thank you, Professor Ogundayo.
Yes,
the role of the West. People have asked, can you focus just on the role of the West?
Yes, I would like to throw in a couple of things. Number one, it's a low-hanging fruit. It's obvious, but we ignore it at our own peril. If you look at how our leaders or bureaucrats go abroad to negotiate, to sign agreements, most of the time they are not well prepared. They just seem to be attracted to the optics and the consequences of that. But you'll notice if the West is doing a deal with Niger or Nigeria, they will include in the delegation people who went to grad school with your African leaders who are in the decision-making process. We don't even revisit every clause. We just go along because, again, mindset, that's one. Two, thank God for the internet and social media. When we're talking transparency, now almost any information is available to the governed and the governed class, to the governed class and the ruler. So when we're talking about the West and its involvement, we need, again, concerted effort, whether at the United Nations or UNDP or UNESCO, to say that how come Africa, the second largest continent, doesn't have a veto power, doesn't have a powerful vote in the Security Council? That is one of the lacunas that we are not addressing. How can we leverage with one voice, our interest? This is what we need to start to speak with one voice. For so long, the tendency has been to divide and conquer. So that's as far as the West is concerned. I'm also interested in the curriculum of our institutions of higher learning. What are we doing to create eventually and in the aggregate a mindset that says Africa first, or Nigeria first, or Ghana first, or gender inequity? How do we weave this in? Because that's where we can begin. I mean, it's a tall order. It's not going to happen in one day, but we can begin to make it possible that everybody has a certain consciousness about what's at stake, especially when we engage the West in the international arena. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Achankeng, 3 minutes, please.
Role of the West. I think the role of the West depends exactly on how Africa got her independence. If independence was arranged for African countries and African leaders, the terms were dictated to them. Those terms are still in place to this day. So whether they are controlling or they are participants or just being there doesn't even come because of how African nations were born. The new nations were born that way. If a president for the Francophones went over to Paris and signed the pact, we all need to just read the Pact of Independence, signed about a week prior to independence, and you see that those pacts, truly, we shouldn't even be talking of independence for those people, because France took control of everything from money to the military to minerals to what is above ground or below ground. And so if that is the way independence was set, then we can't even say, oh, they are dominating us, because they have been there forever. We have talked about speaking with one voice, which is the same like uniting Africa. My question has always been, if we unite Africa and we remain the subordinates that we have been, so what difference does it make? Are we just trying to emulate Europe or the United States, like we say? But in Europe, Luxembourg, which is a little country, goes to a united Europe for her own advantage. It's not about anyone being forced in Europe. Britain went into the European Union when they wanted and left when they wanted. So when we talk about uniting Africa, with that unity, take away the kind of state capture that we're referring to.
Professor Owusu, please.
Thank you. So I want to stay with neocolonialism and its other neighbors. So our leadership bad, yes. Are technocrats working for our good in Africa? No. And I think that's the issue with the new thinkings about neocolonialism. It is working because when the African leaders go into the room, the technocrats they go with have not done their homework. And therefore, in Ghana, for example, we have a parliament that on 2 occasions has dealt with international communities in funny ways. Number one, tax laws in Ghana. You know, if you are a company that comes from away, you can come and work in Ghana for a certain period of time where you will not pay tax. You have a tax holiday. We have had particular like these phone companies, I don't want to mention names here. They come in, when the time is up, they change their names, they become a new body, and they begin to enjoy tax holiday again, so they never pay taxes. In the Western countries, we see tax is what is making them. These companies, if they paid tax, would have made our nations thrive. And these phone companies are the ones I'm bringing in here. And I think if you're Guinean, you probably know the phone company I'm talking about. So they are not well prepared because Parliament is not sitting down and trying to pass a law that will make us get around these tax laws. In Ghana, Parliament passed a law that made 100% sea salt, the selling of it for human and animal consumption, a crime. Which country legislates against a thriving industry? The salt trade in Ghana predates colonial rule. But Ghanaian Parliament, listening to World Health Organization and all of those people out there, passed laws like that. And that is the problem I'm talking about when I say, do we understand the systems? Do we vote for people who even understand the work they are supposed to do? Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves. If Parliament can legislate against a whole industry that is 100% Ghanaian owned, in America and Canada, eggs, beef, they do all sorts of experiments and say eggs are not good for you. Tomorrow, egg is good for you. Beef is not healthy. Beef can give you all the benefits that it will give you. Have they legislated against those industries? No. But in African countries, we sit down and we make all of these things because the laws that we use, it's not someone doing it for us. It is we ourselves. We are not thinking through it and thinking, how can we let this democracy work for us? Thank you.
Cornell, anyone you want to respond to?
If I may, with your indulgence, kindly take about 3 of them. Now, first of all,
sir.
Professor Uswan made references about, if I'm right, the nature of the regional integration mechanisms that we have. My opinion is that we set the objectives for these regional organizations, OAU, African Union, ECOWAS, and the likes, but we never set the ground rules. Unlike the European Union, some benchmarks that you need to meet, governance benchmarks, economic benchmarks, political benchmarks. We don't have them. And therefore, our regional organizations have become a club of the good, the bad, and the ugly. No matter how bad you are still inside. And that is not helping us. Scholars like yourselves on the panel and others elsewhere have suggested that we need to have another dynamic or narrative where you are called into the organization or you qualify to be a member when you meet certain criteria. I think I'll subscribe to that. Now, the roles of the military, I think Professor Antwi-Danso has spoken at length about it. But irrespective of the system, the 3 systems that he mentioned, there are 3 cardinal principles. One is the supremacy of the civilian authority, the control of that authority over, the military or security institutions, and the subordination of these institutions to the civilian political class. And this is where Africa is having problems. So we found ingenious ways, the political class, of buying the loyalties of the officer corps, the top hierarchy, in order that they will not be accountable. So once you buy into them, including forms of personalized rule, where the officer corps marries into the political class. I don't want to mention countries here. But in other systems, you retire as a CDS. By the time you get home, there's a brand new car for you, or there is a house, or there is an envelope, a fat one. That is not helping us. But going back into the days of our forefathers, which I think Professor Mary Osu has emphasized a lot, the chiefs were also soldiers. Therefore, there was this, symbiotic relationship between chieftaincy and the indigenous army. All of them were warriors, and then some of them were chiefs. Could we explore this kind of mechanism? It's going to be difficult, but the idea is that we need the military or security institutions to be part of the governance architecture, to be listened to. Otherwise, then you end up with the frictions, civil-military frictions in Burkina Faso or in Niger. My last point, Prof, is the possibility of coups. I'm glad that the person who asked the question used 2 words, possibility and likelihood. Possibility is possible that you have coups. Even America, powerful as it was, or it is, came close to that on 6th January. They're still dealing with that. The likelihood is where the big question is. But I don't want to be, was he Paul the Octopus? I don't forecast. Look at the indices of governance, of politics, of economics. If any country or any government doesn't meet that, then the likelihood of a coup is very high on the scale. If it does, then there isn't any problem. So currently, I will not speak about Nigeria, I will not speak about Ghana. But as Professor Antwi-Danso said, there are a set of countries that are first-class candidates for coups. Those whose leaders have changed constitutions, with or without the backing of metropolitan powers. And that includes Ouattara's Cote d'Ivoire. What is going to happen to Cote d'Ivoire if Ouattara is able to serve out his 2 terms, which will end probably 2030? Is he even going to survive? What about Togo? What about Benin? What about the Ugandan case that somebody mentioned? So these are cases where you can clearly say that because certain fundamental principles have not been adhered to, the likelihood of a coup being the only effective alternative ranks very high. Yes. And that is what I think our political class should be mindful of in order to avoid, the necessity of coups. I thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Let's take 3 comments as the last one from members of the audience. Dawood Amsa, forgive me if I do not pronounce your name correctly.
Please unmute yourself, sir.
Unmute yourself, sir. While waiting for him, Biodun Ogundayo.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can now. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
You can hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me express a profound appreciation to Professor Toyin Falola. What you are doing is historical legacy, and then this generation will never forget it. Please continue with your effort. Then secondly, I want to talk about the issue of the neocolonialism and the agents in Africa, and the puppeteer and the puppeteers. This phenomenon will never cease to exist in that continent. Everybody has profiled different solutions. The issue of accountability, for example. The question of the rule of law is very, very important. Either military regime or political or democratic regime in Africa, the moment these elites assume the power, they become the emperors. They are above the law. So, and their cronies also, they are above the law. And that is why no policy in Africa succeeds. So I am a student of Islamic jurisprudence and international law. I understand from the history of Islamic law that the moment the Muslims in their historical trajectory began to raise certain individual above the law, there is deviations. And from that moment up to the period of the fall of Ottoman Empire, the Islamic ruling in the world collapsed. So the same thing in Africa. So most of the African governments, either under military or civilian, they are all above the law. And I think I will strongly recommend that let us find a way of promoting the crop of leaders that will stand by the law, that whatever the law introduced in the country, that law must be implemented irrespective of position of any leader. That is the only way. So we cannot stop the puppeteers and the puppeteers, the neocolonialists and the African agent of neocolonialism. So they will continue. But if we look at how a crop of leaders can emerge to say the law of the land must be imposed, irrespective of the position of the leader or whatever follow them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Leonardo Kushonu. Forgive me if I don't pronounce your name very well correctly. Kushonu is from Uganda, or where are you from? We cannot hear you, sir.
Please unmute yourself.
We cannot hear you. While waiting for him, Martin, please. Martin.
Thank you, Prof. I hope you can all hear me.
Oh, Martin, Syracuse University. Long time. Good to see you. Martin
thank you,
is
Prof.
from Kenya.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Thank you,
sir.
Prof. Thank you, Prof. I want to thank all the presenters for or the panel for those excellent ideas that you have provided for this very, very important and current topic as far as Africa is concerned. Now, I just want to follow up a little bit faster with some comments that relate to a question I will have to ask at the end, which is that the issue raised by my colleague Edmund Abaka about the need for accountability by the African political class, I think it is a very important question that should be given a lot of consideration as a way of finding solution to the current political dilemmas that we are discussing today. And I think my colleague, Dr. Ogundayo, followed up with this quite a little bit by mentioning, and I saw him talk about this in a very emotional and touching way, about the need to change the mindset of the leadership. And specifically, he mentioned the need for education as being very key. And a couple of other presenters have also, I think, mentioned and talked about that specific element as well. So I was wondering what any of the panelists, I think they can go and, they can go ahead and comment on this issue. The role of the civil society, strengthening, educating and empowering the African civil society as a way of perhaps cultivating a more permanent solution to what is bedeviling most of the African countries. And what I mean by this is just the ordinary people. These are the individuals who vote in our leaders, whether parliamentarians or presidential candidates and so on and so forth. And I think they hold the key and the power to having these people be able to be accountable. So I was just wondering what any of the panelists would be able to kind of highlight a little bit on that issue. Thank you.
Ehofu. E-O-F-U.
Yeah. Hi, good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation. Mine was, what I want to say is very similar to what the previous person spoke about with regards to educating the people. So rather than, it's a contribution rather than a question. I believe education holds the key to a lot of all our problems. Being educated enlightens you, being educated gives you the training for accountability and transparency. Being educated, teaches you a lot. What you find amongst the political class is a lot of people go into these offices with very, very little education because the criteria for going into politics, for example, in Nigeria is really low. I mean, it's secondary school certificates. And on top of that, we hear about people still falsifying certificates and results, which is very discouraging. So I believe that, educating the younger ones, having schools for people who intend to go into leadership positions, like you have, for example, in the UK, you have Sandhurst and other top management schools that prepare people for leadership. I think we should have something similar in Nigeria, in our countries, so that people can really be trained, for leadership roles. So I think education is key.
Thank you, Eofu. But right. That correlation We have not been able to establish, with due respect. Nigeria has produced a president that has a PhD. So if you look at the crop of this elite, whether it's in Ghana or Sierra Leone, they all have degrees. That correlation between, that correlation between their education and what they've done in government has not encouraged us to lead to in that direction. So for instance, the most notable figure, say in northern Nigeria, their best governor so far, I just finished secondary school by the name of Ahmadu Bello. So the others who came after him, they went to school, but they've not achieved as much success as he has done. So
sorry, would you mind if I interject? I mean, if you have the one leader who is educated and is surrounded by a lot of uneducated people, I mean, he won't be able to make a difference.
Most of them have gone to school, they went to the universities, they have degrees. So is that correlation?
But some of them can't read contracts. I mean, like, we get into trouble with contracts that have been signed.
Contract, but they want to pocket some money. They can't read contract.
Okay, well, I just thought perhaps they weren't able to read contracts. I mean,
No, they can read contract, but there's something for them
understand.
before the contract gets to the table. Well, I will let them respond. Charles Prempe from Birmingham is a Ghanaian based in Birmingham. Welcome. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yes, Prof, thanks for the opportunity. As a matter of fact, I'm going to build on from where you left off with an Akan proverb. Forgive me, I don't want to be an Akan imperialist, but let me begin from there. In fact, it is said that we don't blow a trumpet on an empty stomach. So, you see, the point is not that African leaders are not educated. No. In fact, development comes at a cost. And because it comes at a cost, we must be intentional about it. Way back in the 18th century, Adam Smith was clear that it is not for the sake of benevolence that a bread baker, not the meat, gives what they give, but their own self-preservation. So they planned what they wanted to do and executed it and succeeded. So this idea of accountability, they are all nice things. They are good things to hear. But we also do know that the kind of politics we practice, the monetization, is a factor that encourages the lack of transparency in our politics. As well as our politicians have to buy their way into politics. Again, it isn't that.
So I know you happen to be a pastor. How come, since they wrote the 10 Commandments, people have not obeyed them?
Yes, I mean, it's also very clear that the point is that the problem is not the 10 Commandments, it's about the human nature. So governance, that is why if you look at social contracts,
if human nature fails in responding to God, why will it work with human beings?
My point is that the reason we are discussing this is that we pretend or we don't want to understand the human nature as ontologically selfish. I mean, that's what I'm saying as I began by quoting.
No, we actually understand the human nature.
Yes.
Human beings are programmed to destroy themselves and they are programmed towards vices.
Yes.
So why don't you say you are following the Chinese model in Ghana? We catch you, we kill you.
No.
Because we understand the human nature to steal.
And had to plan how to keep their own people from killing themselves. And that's exactly what they did.
No. Prempe, you are a pastor. We understand human nature. That's why you go to church every Sunday.
Yes.
Because you know you're a sinner. You pray.
Yes.
But can we approach this issue from the human nature?
Yes.
Because we already know what human nature is.
No, that's what I'm saying. So my point is to say that, you see, once we have a better understanding of the human nature,
we already have a good understanding of human nature before Christ.
Prof, a moment. You see, that's what I'm trying to build on from there. Looking at how the so-called developed nations have survived and succeeded with that understanding. So the point is, are we prepared to go that direction? That's the question. I think that's what we need to locate the debate. That's what we need to locate the argument.
Okay, so let's bring this up when they throw Trump into prison. And then you now begin to say, okay, our problem is not with the last speaker, we don't have education, we don't understand human nature. Our problem is that we understand them, but what are we doing?
Yes, so what we are doing...
For instance,
yes,
I know you're a pastor, and that's why I'm challenging you. You are accountable to God. You know, if you do this, you die, you're not going to see God. You understand? I'm manning the gate of heaven with Peter. And I can say, Prempe, these are the offenses you have broken. I'm throwing you into hellfire. Mm-hmm. And that cautions you. What are the sanctions? What are the punishments? So let me bring in Biodun Ogundayo.
No.
Hold on. Biodun Ogundayo, because my panelists are tired. I can see their faces. Biodun Ogundayo.
Yes, thank you, Prof, for this opportunity, and thank you, the entire panelists and all the other listeners. I'm talking from Germany here as a disaster manager, and having said that, I think I've been listening for over almost 2 hours now. We never, respectfully to the panelists and every ideas raised, we've never talked about the role of technology to all of these issues. I think we mentioned it. I think you, Mr. Professor Toyin, you only referenced technology at one point in trying to respond to one of these questions raised. But as one of the issues and how it connects to these problems or the issues, I think we've never mentioned it. And that's the first thing. Then the other thing, which is very integral, is that we don't really appreciate the baby steps we've taken over the years. So, and before, of course, when many of you, the panelists who are in our ages, these problems have been there. So now we still spend more time about the problems, and it won't solve the problem, respectfully, because it's obvious that virtually everyone understands the problem, but how do we solve it? That's the first.
No, and with respect to technology, can you specify what you mean? Because technology is what is making the coup possible, what is creating ISIS, what is creating Boko Haram. What specifically do you mean?
Thank you for that. It's very broad. I will agree with that because one, the ease of people from every part of the world to actually evaluate their present economy in relative to other economies.
All Africans can do that effortlessly.
So it makes
young people are very good at doing that.
Not working. Everything is not working. But some of us who have been privileged to live in these supposedly working systems understands that they're not 100% perfect. And but they still see themselves as working in progress. And another thing is that we talk about most of our approaches as being faulting the leaders. And that's like, I would not put it like faulting the leaders, permit me to use another word, like a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up approach. A bottom-up approach will definitely solve the problem faster than trying to remove the leaders. Because, for example, it took the people of Sudan virtually less than 1 week to remove their long-serving leader. And before you realize it, the whole place is a mess again. So if the people understands that we can do local elections easily, and it takes a lot, and it's important to getting the leader from at the top to get to perform well. Then I think it will solve the problem much more.
Thank you. Mohamed Tal, 2 more, please. After these 2, because the panelists are tired. Thank you, Mohamed Tal. Mohamed.
Thank you very much, Prof. Let me first appreciate the panelists.
Can we see your camera is not well positioned, please? Okay. For our recording purposes, we can't see you.
We're seeing the head.
We're just seeing your head.
Okay, the camera, okay.
Mm-hmm. No, it's better now. Yes.
Can you see me now, please?
Yes. You're very handsome.
Yeah. I quite appreciate the contributions of the panelists. And we have had a lot of knowledge about coups and counter-coups in Africa. Now, I want to say that we should first, in understanding military coups, we first look at the military institution. The point is the military institution was established essentially to protect the interests of the ruling elites. Unfortunately, the same institution that is meant to protect them is turning against them. Now, the question is, why do they turn against those that promoted them or established them in the first place? Is it a case of the Frankenstein robot turning against his master? Now, what I try to look in here is that we have not clearly come out with the political economy approach of military coups. I have heard Professor Nwosu talking about the economic aspect. Now, I see it as a triangle of conspiracy between this neocolonial African state, foreign capital represented by international bourgeoisie, and the local capital represented by local bourgeoisie. Now, it depending on the interests of the three or the two major conspirators, if the interests of the international bourgeoisie is at stake, even the so-called democratic government is pulled down by the same military that the fathers of democracy tell us that they are arbitrary rulers. They install military leaders to pull down democratic elected leaders. A case in point is Mobutu Sese Seko in the Democratic Republic of Congo, former Zaire, removing the first Prime Minister of Zaire. Then that was the work of the neocolonial powers that installed military in power. Another case in point, we look at Burkina Faso under Thomas Sankara. It was a coup that is adjudged as a populist coup. But because the interest of foreign capital was at stake, in collaboration of local bourgeoisie, they had to remove him and then brought in the Blaise Compaoré. Now, if you consider this in a nutshell, you discover that the economic aspect of the African state has to be decolonized. Once the economy is not decolonized, we remain victims of military coups orchestrated by the conspirator of local and international capital. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Political economy, neocolonialism, the power of external forces. Thank you very much. Mr. Tayo, please. Be brief.
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, I heard all the points that have been made, but the only one I was able to latch onto is that of education. When the word education is thrown around, in Africa in particular, the question I ask myself is, what do we understand to be education? I would say for myself, I've been fortunate enough to have been educated in Ibadan at a time when the country, well, I'm quite a young person, but we still had the conscience as to who we were. Such concepts as slavery, such concepts as what it actually meant to be a Yoruba person were being told. When people talk about education in Africa, for the most part, people are talking about people acquiring degrees from universities whereby you can show that, oh, look, I'm lettered. Because I'm lettered, look how much I know. The kind of education I believe in that would move Africa forward is such that for each locality, the representatives understand who they are vis-a-vis the society they are from. As in, what actually makes us tick out here? Who are we fundamentally? What do we need here? As against what are we seeing elsewhere that looks good? You know, in Africa, what I have seen, and I'll make examples of, I don't want to point fingers. I'll just speak for the things I have seen in Africa, that when education is spoken about, it is not about how useful the individual who has acquired this education is to their society. It's being spoken about as in how much of this big picture do you understand?
Thank you. Thank you. So you're talking about values and ethics.
Yes,
that's what you're talking about, values and ethics. Yes.
Yes.
Because the point is not that people do not go to school, they don't know ABC, they don't have PhD. You can know all those, What are the ethics? What are the values that underpin what we do? And oh my God, Leonardo Koshonu, you've got your chance. The last person I'm going to call, oh, he said he couldn't unmute himself. Okay, Leonardo Koshonu, now can you unmute yourself? You came before. Can you now do that, sir?
Yes, I can. Thank you, sir.
Very good.
So I want to say thank you to the panel and all the speakers for the excellent arguments and points that have been made today. Democracy seems to me to be a failed vision that has materialized into a nightmare in Africa. The main Western proponents of democracy, the United Nations, Great Britain, and America, are undemocratic. The United Nations has a Security Council with permanent members who have veto powers. This is undemocratic. The United Kingdom's Parliament has two chambers, the House of Commons with 650 elected members, and the UK House of Lords with 837 unelected members. This is undemocratic. In America, the outcome of elections are decided by the Electoral College, an arcane, undemocratic system by which the president is chosen, not by the people.
Can you make your linkage now? Leave the examples now. Make the link.
When is now a good time for Africa and Africans to look towards or look back or look backwards to creating a form of government not designed to fail, that is gender balanced and aligned to our traditional, cultural, and spiritual values?
Very good. Very good point. And please, panelists, note it. You should read my essay released last week, The West and the Hypocrisy of Democracy. The West and the Hypocrisy of Democracy. And finally, Mwadiora.
Thank you, Professor. I'm sure I'm muted. Thank you, Professor, for giving me the opportunity. I wanted to talk about, when people have been talking about decolonization, what about decolonization of imported religions? To what extent has these religions have impact on our democracy? Because the Abrahamic religions, as far as I know from African history, are imported. It came with colonialism. So to what extent are we really talking about that? Why do we shy away from that?
And in making this point, what has this imported religion done to damage democracy?
Yes.
Before we can I'm asking you.
I think it has done some serious damage.
Can you specify those?
Well, when your God doesn't look like you, that's not democratic.
Okay. Is the New Testament not about socialism?
Well, the New Testament is an important thought process. We had our own values and ethics before the New Testament came to us.
And you don't see the Quran as a socialist document.
The Quran, again, is an imported faith that was imposed on African people. It was not indigenous to the thoughts of the Yoruba culture or the Igbo culture that I come from and the religions we do have. What happened to them? Why do we demonize? Why are the religions demonized? Why are the Abrahamic religions are?
And each time I throw challenges, I'm just trying to create complexity.
I understand, yes, and I agree with you completely. Colonialism came with imported religions, whether it's Islam or Christianity. In fact, those of us who have Christian names should ask ourselves, why do we have foreign names attached to us? Isn't that part of the democratic of messing up our minds? To what extent does that help with that democracy?
On that note of insurgency, we've spent 3 hours. I would ask all the panelists, I will give them 5 minutes to talk about anything under the sun. Maybe the colonel wants to take over and stage coup in Uganda, become head of state, and Ogundayo becomes his cabinet minister. We banish the king to Australia. We bring back patriarchy.
I'd rather caution that with the analogy of health science, if you don't keep your environment and your body clean, you are likely to contract diseases and you die. So this applies to democracy. Professor Vladimir, whether we have democracy or we don't have it, we have a bit of it. We must learn to safeguard that and consolidate it. But I'm afraid what I've seen, Professor also referred to 30 plus years of democratic dispensation in Ghana. But what I have seen is not democracy in practice. The political classes find in disingenuous ways of manipulating almost every institution and every system. So for instance, there must be freedom of expression. Now you don't even need a license to establish a radio or TV station. I stand to be corrected. But then these stations or media houses depend on advertisements in order to pay their staff and stay in business. The largest offeree of, or the largest entity that offers advertisements is the government. And the government will smartly deny stations that it perceives as opposition stations of advertisements. My advice is that the more you resort to such, in quotes, constitutional means, but constitutional tyrannism or tyrannical means, the more you're endangering the very democracy that you seek, to be part of. The CSOs, I would wish that they played dual roles or multiple roles. They play the role of agency, and they also play the role of activist. Sitting in your nice offices, air conditioning offices, offering training, and that is the end of the story, is not going to shake up African democracy. We must see civil societies that adopt watchdog approaches to hold their governments to account. Role of technology, I don't think I'm qualified, is above my pay grade. But why is the military overthrowing the governments that established them? I think all of us will agree that governments don't establish the military or militaries. These institutions are established per the constitutional provisions or the relevant acts of parliament. So it is up to us as citizens and the range of civil society groups that we belong to, as well as us in politics or out of politics in business, to ensure that these constitutional provisions, are what guide our authorities in power. It's not going to be easy. And I cited the example of the demonstrations in Ghana, the pick and choose, the selectivity, that if one group, for instance, disregards the service of an application for an injunction and they are brutalized. And then you have another institution that ignores the same scenario of ignoring an application for an injunction and nothing happens to that institution. That selectivity of constitutional provisions or legal provisions is not what good democracies are about. You may probably feel that as a political party in power, you have benefited, but in the long run, you have injured the democratic institutions and structures and environment that we all, subscribe to. So that would be my humble advice. Let's hope and pray that coups don't happen. But then having said that, if our political elite don't pay attention to the cardinal principles of democracy, the rule of law, whatever it means, and then the protection of human rights, for instance, and the sanctity of electoral processes, you may win the power, but then you may have, done a lot of injury to the state that you belong to. And finally, to our regional organizations, the best that they can do for Africa is to apply our continental regional instruments fairly. A coup is a coup. There is no good coup or bad coup. Civilian unconstitutionality cannot be acceptable when, on the other hand, military unconstitutionality is not acceptable. So if some of our leaders think that they are beyond accountability, I think the spate of what we are calling the third wave of coups shows clearly that coups may not be likely, but they are a possibility. And if you tick many of the boxes, one day coups will happen. So that's my advice to the political class and to the societies that we belong. I thank all of you.
Thank you, Colonel Festus Aboagye. Before Vladimir, the professor, completely falls asleep, are you awake now? He's tired.
I'm not sleeping. I'm listening very attentively.
Oh, you are reflecting.
And listening to others, I'm also learning.
Okay.
But
can you make your closing statement, sir?
Right. Thank you so much. Yes, the likelihood of such coups, which I call the systemic coups, are possible throughout Africa because of the democratic deficit. Deficit in the sense that democracy is about constitutionalism, institutionalism, and public awareness of their surrounding. People are talking about education. When we say people are not educated, it means they are not educated even about themselves. It's not the degrees, as Prof said already. It's not the degrees, but do they understand what is around them? If it is precisely because they do not understand the system that they become pawns in the political game, that all they need to do is to vote for somebody and they are paid for voting. And that creates a subsystem which is undemocratic. And with that undemocratic accession to power, we do all things. We recoup the money we have spent and we monetize democracy. Obviously, then the state will be declining and stagnating. And that's what we see in several other African countries. And when the military or when there is a problem, then there is unconstitutionalism, then the rule of law is also lost. That is what brings in the military. So there are several candidates. Festus was afraid to mention, but let me say that, look, countries like Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Chad are all candidates. Congo, Brazzaville, they are all candidates for coups, and we must watch out. Even those countries we think are democratically stable must watch out, because once the democratic deficit is there and the economy is not doing well, any other person who just usurps power will be heralded as a hero and as a savior. We must watch that. People are talking about accountability. It will never happen when you have a deep state. In the deep state, everybody is struggling to get something to survive. So whatever he is given to keep him quiet or to survive him, it's okay. And therefore nobody accounts to nobody. And we must watch that. So accountability is a problem and will continue to be a problem when you have a deep state in almost all the countries. Somebody mentioned Sudan, that people were able to overthrow their government, but they did not understand what they were doing. They did not enter the institutions they did not supplant what they overthrew with anything. And that is why we have what is happening in Sudan today, because the people there can't be a vacuum. It is in the vacuum that the military has gotten up and they are fighting now. We must watch that. So it's not a matter of just the people just getting up, Arab Spring, destroying, and nothing comes into place. There will be more anarchy. My contention is that we can speed up integration in the real sense of integration. And that is the only way that the integrative units, ECOWAS, ECAS, and others can play a meaningful role in urging democracies in their areas. But if we don't speed up the areas of integration, the integrative processes through actual rules and regulations of acceptability or being membership, and that we open it just up, everybody comes in, we are not going to get where we should be. And I would like to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Professor Moses Owusu, your closing statement.
Mary, you said Moses.
Oh, sorry.
So I was wondering.
He's tired.
No, so apologies.
No gender problems over here.
No,
I
none
I
at
thought
all.
Mary and Moses mean the same thing. Now that I know they
That's
don't
exactly
mean
what I'm saying.
In your defense, they are all names from the Abrahamic religion.
I thought they deal with the law. They brought the law. Okay, Mary.
So I think that I want to start off by going a little bit into my own field, which is intellectual history, and throwing a little bit of concern that I have with some comments. I have a problem when we empower the West so much. You know, when we think that the West is so knowledgeable, they have done this, they have done that. I think we need to clip the wings of the West by recognizing that knowledge that we all cherish, here, there, and everywhere, is a product of all of us. Humanity is human knowledge, more so, a lot of them Western knowledge. For example, if you ask most people about Western forms of dressing, they will go and bring a cotton shirt, cotton trousers, cotton whatever, and say, oh, this is what the Western people wear. Do they grow cotton in their countries? Who showed them that you can use cotton to make clothing? And it's all of these with the different forms of knowledge. I use this as the best example. So I have a problem when we go into nativist modes and think about our indigenous knowledge being something, and then Western knowledge, and then we give Western knowledge this position that it's so powerful, leaving that I'm coming to the fact that religion, for example, we have all co-opted these religions, Abrahamic religions, because that's where it comes from. The West co-opted it. Back home for us too, we have co-opted it. And we deploy the kinds of Catholicism we like in Africa, Presbyterian we like in Africa, which is different. If you go to other parts of the world, I mean, there will be similarities, but differences too. So we have come to own some of these thoughts too. Moving from that, I want to talk about accountability. I think that accountability, as mentioned by Professor Abaka, is something that is integral to the survival of all political systems, including democracy. As I said earlier, democracy is not new to us in Africa. It is something we have been used to. If nothing at all, the kinds of voting that we have done it from the inception of our independent nations. So we are used to it. We are familiar with it. We are lamenting here because of the fact that we continue to pursue the best form. And on my own behalf, I want to submit that the best form is the form that we have adapted, that recognizes parts of our journeys, that incorporates some of what we know, using the words of Sankophaism in Ghana, when we had our biggest intellectual movement in the 1900s. We called it Sankophaism. And the Sankophaist fathers told us that Sankophaism is going back to pick what is good, only what is good in our culture, and adapting it, integrating it with what is good from elsewhere. So it is not by picking only what is good from our past, but by also adding what is good from elsewhere, that we can get the best form of Sankophaist practice. This should include, as one contributor rightly said, cosmological balance, which was at the core of our African governance structures. Wherever you go in Africa, we had balance as a thing. And so women, the absence of women or the paucity of women too small in the hierarchies of our governance structure is something we want to address. But to end it, I want to bring us back to the economic issue. Isn't it time that we go into the room, our technocrats? If we keep on pointing fingers at the leaders, the fish head is rotten. But in our case in Africa, the whole fish is rotten. We all need to understand that we are all contributors to the problem. If you are not doing your work well, as the person that asked the question on technology brought about, if you are not doing your work well, how do you expect the nation to thrive?
Thank you, Professor Owusu, because you are becoming motherly now. You're now talking like a mother, and I promise you, we'll take care of our kids.
King Fuankem,
your closing statement, sir.
Thank you very much, Prof.
She has reminded you to be fatherly and do your work very well.
Thank you very much, great Prof, for this great opportunity to all of us. I'm going to close again with the colonial presence in Africa that Professor Da Silva had mentioned earlier. And I say this because there are scholars who continue to argue that colonialism was long gone, so why are we always being reminded? The unfortunate thing is that the contradictions of the colonial state were passed on to the new states at independence all over Africa. I do not know of any of our countries that are different from how they were shaped by the colonial people. I was doing a book sometimes past, and a Nigerian contributor said, Nigeria, the marriage of unwilling partners. So if all of Africa is still like that, and we're all looking at what is happening to Africa, then we cannot. Sometimes I have a problem, like Professor Owusu has. And my problem is when we talk about post-coloniality, how post-colonial are we? How post-colonial are we when the colonial masters are all still there? France, for instance, is very present in every way possible. So are these countries post-colonial? How are they post-colonial? When gross inequalities of the colonial past remain in power relations, when national wealth and development opportunities are unevenly distributed. I'm actually going to be brief. I'm not a historian by training, but I know that the currents of history are not vertical. It is not like Africa had reached a point where we could begin to forget about military coups or about coups. How did we even begin to think that they were gone when we know exactly how people in Africa are living? I think my understanding is that the currents of history are secular. And so being secular, the coups hadn't gone, they were likely to return. As long as the current conditions persist, there will be coups. Even in those non-former French colonies, like Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Kenya, or wherever, that talk about democracies. I do not know how democratic these democracies are. African practices of democracy, to mention a little, they are a little scary to me. In fact, elections in most of Africa are coups. We need to understand this. If we follow elections carefully in most of Africa, they are coups in themselves. So elections being coups, the West turns a blind eye in their own national interest because they want to continue to deal with whoever is in power or whatever regime is in power, provided they are allowed to set up their military bases and take from the wealth of those countries. I think I will close by saying that the positive, especially concerning the recent coups that we're all talking about in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, the good thing that is happening today and that we can start being hopeful, like we had said earlier, is that African people are beginning to be aware of who they are. It's awareness, which is growing. Africans are beginning to be aware of who they are, what their countries have, what the West has done for many decades and centuries, and the need for African people to begin to take their own destinies in their own hands.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Because we still have Professor Ogundayo. Have you given your closing statement?
No, sir. Should I go ahead?
Please, sorry, King, for asking you to stop. Yes.
One more time, I really humbly appeal to every one of us on a platform such as this. Some of us are very close to centers of power, especially in the ECOWAS nations. Please beg our leaders to let food and medicine into Niger. This is real life issue. Let in medicine and food, and you can throw in all the other sanctions. Because every single day I get phone calls. I talk to my former students and people that are in the system.
Thank you very much. As you are aware, there are many newspaper editors who have joined us who will relay this message.
Yes.
And I will also, in my own analysis of what you have all said, also include this important point, that if you want to punish political leaders, military leaders, millions of citizens are not part of that power rivalries. They are not part of the conflict. How do we make sure that they live their own normal, regular
I didn't
life?
get my 5 minutes.
Okay. Do you? But your plea is what more than 30 minutes?
Well, I just need 1 more minute, please.
Okay,
sir.
go ahead. Go ahead.
We've talked about education and mindset. And for those of us who grew up at a certain time, I grew up in Ghana, in the Yoruba community, which was an immigrant community in Ghana. We went to school 2 times a day. But at night, we went to lesson organized by the Yoruba community, where we learned the Yoruba alphabet and the Yoruba culture. So that means, because Falola has been talking about agency, values, and ethics. Well, the Yoruba community in Ghana in the 60s, had agency, they organized. So beyond the Western education, we went to lesson. And by the way, how many of you have heard of H.H. Hagan, Courtesy for Boys and Girls? And also I.M. Potts, P-O-T-T-S, Makers of Civilization. These were 2 textbooks. The first one, Makers of Civilization, there was no African leader presented. The only one was Lobengula of Zimbabwe, and he was presented as a loser who was defeated by Cecil Rhodes. So I'm back to what I've been saying earlier in response to my brother Martin. The curriculum is central to create. It may not be immediate, but it's a low-hanging fruit. Number one, change the curriculum to incorporate our value system, our stories, because even at the most elemental level, If you go to your doctor and you don't tell your story, the doctor can profile a treatment. That's one. Two, democratize the publishing system. Publish African stories in African creoles. More people speak Pidgin in Nigeria than the Queen's English or than their local dialect. Publish books in Pidgin. Attendance to that, make the materials for publishing. India has done it. You know, the cotton industry, the wood industry, we can create our own paper pulp industries. It doesn't have to be glossy or whatever. And it makes it a lot easier, democratize in the real sense of the word, knowledge. Falola has written a book on our indigenous gurus. How did we come by this knowledge? It's because he has played a role in making it like a midwife accessible to the rest of us. So accessibility to education, changing the curriculum with long-term goals in view, not just training people to get degrees and certificates. The joke in Africa is that how many engineers do you have to train to change a light bulb? They know all the theories, the physics, but just grabbing the light bulb and fixing it. There's enough for us to do that I call low-hanging fruit. And the aggregate will be a change in mindset. You know, all these things that we have discussed so far are dividends of democracy. You know, but one more time, please talk to your leaders to please open up Niger. Let the food and medicine get through. Thank you, sir. Oloye.
Thank you very much. And you can see I try to protect all of you, but the discussion has been so engaging. Members of the audience did not want to leave. They kept coming back, and I've tried to protect you by saying don't answer all the questions. And you spent 4 hours. I apologize, but I'm sure it's very energizing. The contributions are much appreciated. I've enjoyed you. I've received WhatsApp messages that they want us to bring this panel back, which is a testimony to the success of this gathering. I want to thank my own team, our technical team, led by Segun Olopade, and our illustrators, Theophilus and Mike Fionayi, our youth, Ade Abib, and all of them that frame questions for us, our consultant, Professor of Political Science at Brandeis University. All of you, thank you. This is very well attended, and I do not know the angle that the media will be using from this, but these are going to be heavily reported in various newspapers during the week. I want to call on Professor Mary Owusu to thank all of you on behalf of all of you. And please don't forget to thank yourself, Professor Owusu. Thank you.
In fact, I'll start with myself then. Mary, I want to thank you for participating in this event. So we want to thank Professor Fuankem Achankeng for, I hope I said it well, for joining us and bringing with that along his insights. We are most grateful that you did not impose tradition on us or traditional rules. I think that that is a little swipe at you. Then we want to thank Colonel Festus Aboagye for your great insights. You really did show that you came very well prepared and you came covering all the bases. And we are assured that the military is, since you are retired, the military is in your past, but you are not retarded. And so it continues to be something that you think about. And I think some of your insights are things that will go a long way in terms of enhancing our militaries in Africa, and we are grateful for joining us. We also want to thank Professor Vladimir Antwi-Danso, who has been an old horse at this, he attended the school that I was unable to attend, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. So if nothing at all, we thank you for attending the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I grew up, that's where my father went. And so I grew up with flyers from there, and it was my dream school. It's nice to see a second person that went there. And I know from my father and from your insights that you came into this room with all of the wonderful things you have learned. And I could hear echoes of negotiation. So I believe you did some negotiation at in the Harvard negotiation school, because my dad went there too. So we thank you for your insights and contribution. And last but not the least, we want to thank Professor Biodun Ogundayo, who has made a very passionate appeal about allowing medicines and food. And by so doing, also bringing to the fore the vulnerable people, sometimes in some of these political machinations that are complex, but should also be remembered that they are vulnerable people. Professor Ogundayo, your insights and your push to all of us about our mindsets. I think that you listen to a lot of Bob Marley, so you want us to emancipate our minds from that kind of mental slavery and everything within it. So we are grateful. We really did enjoy listening to all of us. And so I want to thank you all, and in so doing, then end with thanking myself. And we thank the audience. You've been so great. Your insights have enriched many of the things you have done. And as researchers on this panel, I think you have also brought so much that we can think about: economic issues, accountability, technology, and women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In 5 minutes' time, the entire conversation will be posted live, not edited, the full transcript. Thank you very much.